Hello everyone and welcome to today's session on TIBCO software tutorial by Intellipaat. TIBCO software unlocks the potential of real-time data for making faster, smarter decisions. The connected intelligence platform seamlessly connects any application or data source, intelligently unifies data for greater access, trust and control, and confidently predicts outcomes in real time and at scale as well. In this session, you will understand what is TIBCO and working of TIBCO. So without further wait, let's check the agenda for the session. But before we begin with the session, please subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon so that you never miss any update from Intellipaat.
So today I'm just beginning everything from the very start. Essentially, because the data load is something which is very important with respect to any of the BI tools, not just Spotfire. So once this is done, for all the rest of the session, for rest of the trainings, I'll be working on the Excel file itself. But just to showcase you, so that you are aware that when that need comes, actually, when you start working with Spotfire, and when you want to join or pull the data from a database instead of Excel, actually. So, but for the other practice sessions, apart from the connections, we'll be working on the Excel, right? So once we have the Spotfire, window, once we have logged into the system and the Spotfire window, this is the first landing page on the Spotfire. So essentially, again, coming back to the left hand panel, the flyout, we have a couple of different options which does different things when needed. So essentially, our point of focus right now is the top one on the left hand side, which is the files and data flyout. So essentially, with this flyout, we can either connect our Spotfire from a data source, or in a different way I can say that we can pull different data from into our Spotfire environment, or if we already have a report created, so if not new, we can open a already created file from here, either from browse local file or from the Spotfire library. So browse local file would be any file essentially supported by Spotfire. So as I said earlier, it's the .dxp extension, or if it is data, then in the local file it will be Excel, CSV, TXT. Those data can be pulled from browse local file. Apart from that, any other sources like any databases you can use to connect to, and you will get a plenty of different options here, enormous actually, to connect, given the different vendors and different types of data sources available in the market. Yes, I'm very sure that it doesn't cover all of them. So in such cases, if there is a need, how would we do that? How would we connect it? So for that, we have this other option. In with other, we discussed on this copying from the clipboard and pasting it onto the Spotfire. And this is something managed data connection. This is something the connections which are already created, so we can manage those things, changing things, changing the settings over that. And this is the one it should be very handy when we don't have when we want to connect with any sources other than what listed here. So we can make use of this ODBC, ADO.NET, or OLADB provider, and simultaneously you need to have the driver installed in our system to work with this. So what I'll do is that I will first again go back and showcase you that how I have loaded a table. So when we have this landing page, either we can go to the left hand panel and open the files and data panel. You can see here we have this option again here to open it. So in a way, this would open the files and data panel itself. So now I have a Excel file in my local system in a folder. So I want to open that file, which is called a sample superstore. So essentially, again, since I have been recently using this folder, so automatically it opens the current folder that I'm working on. But for others, maybe it would open some your documents or other folders. So we may need to navigate to the specific folder where we have placed our data, and just need to click it. So this takes up a couple of times depending on the size of the data, the volume of the data that we have in the file, and provide us this window where we can, if needed, if there are multiple worksheets in this case, so it would allow us to select which worksheet we would want to import. So in this case, this is orders. So again, without making any changes to the data type, I feel that what's being coming. I think it's good for analysis. So I'm not concerned about that. So I'll leave that as it is, and straight away I'll just click on OK. So this is the option we get once the data is loaded. So it enables it provides us an option at the very beginning to to rename the table that is loaded into the report. So you can just leave it as it is, or you can change it. So if it is an Excel file or CSV, what it does is that it takes the name from the file name, that is sample superstore, and we have a hyphen in between, and the orders is the worksheet. So this is the by default. So when the next time I'll load the returns worksheet from the same file, it will be sample superstore hyphen returns. So for now, I'm just keeping it as it is. Because I'll show you, the other way how we can rename any data table that we have loaded into our analysis. And again, this is for the transformation. So I'm just keeping it as it is without doing much. So I'll just press OK. So essentially, see again, it's the same thing what we received earlier. It's kind of notification. So it looks into data and it feels that something peculiar. It's not matching the format of with the rest of other rows in any specific particular column or something. So automatically it just points. So this is not an error. Essentially, I would say this is something which can be ignored. And if we feel that no, this is something, so we would need to look into the data and just rectify them. So again, this is something we will discuss in more detail at later. So I'll close this for now. So now our data is loaded into the report. And how do we know that? So once we have any data loaded into analysis, automatically all the options are automatically enabled. So this means that now I am free to create any charts. We have data and we can just begin with that. And also the other thing that how we know that few other informations that we can get from here is that if you look at the down below footer panel, we see a few options here. So it says 21 columns and how many rows. It's 9994 of 9994 rows essentially. So let's look into the detail of it. So for any into the tabular detail, we have this table plot on the visualization. So we can just open it and just see what is the data about and how the rows and columns look like that. So this is I would say this is one way of pulling the data onto the report if it is a flat files. The other way would be, again, if it is a file, so you can just copy and paste it from the clipboard. So I won't be essentially I did it yesterday, and you may go and try. So if you find any difficulties on that, so we can just I'll show you again. Now what I'll do is that I have a SQL server here. So essentially it is the same data, what I have imported from the Excel file is the same data here, but it's coming from the database, Microsoft SQL Server. So my intention was, at this point of time, I was not looking at what data I'm importing to the report. It's just that how we are importing to the report, right? So essentially, how we can if we talk about the connections from a database, in this case the SQL server. So essentially a database can be your run can be or may be running locally to your system, local host, or it is running at some server. So but in any way you'll have the information if you want to connect, like what is the data source name, what is the server name, what is the port name, and all these different information, what is the credentials that you will be using. Either the database supports Windows authentication, or it is a SQL authentication by SQL, or the Active Directory itself, so all this information we would need before we connect. So since this database is running locally to my system, actually the server is installed locally, so I know the name, and essentially if you look at the top itself, it will give us the data source name. So what I have done actually essentially is that I have kept it handy with me, just in case if I want to use this. So I have created a database called as Spotfire itself, just for the purpose of Spotfire, and I have imported all the three different worksheets from the Excel file: orders, people, and returns. I could have done use some other data, but the real reason was that to compare between both these two scenario, working with the Excel and working with data from the database, and how same thing can be achieved but in a different way. So let me first connect the data, and then I can show you more about this. So what I'll do is that, since this is a Microsoft SQL Server, again I'll go back to this files and data. I'll click on it, and this time, since I am connecting to a database, I'll go to connect to, and I'll look for something called Microsoft and SQL Server. So it should start with M. So I'll just try and go. This is sorted in alphabetical order. So I'll need to go a bit down. Microsoft Azure. We have SharePoint. Yes, here it comes. Microsoft SQL Server. I'll click on this, and what I'll do is I'll click on new connection. Now the server name is, this is what I have kept, and this you'll be getting if your database is hosted on a server, so you need to get in touch with the probably the admin of the database, or any your team member who is working with the data team, so to get this detail. And what I'll do is I'll just try to connect, and it accepted very quickly. So as I said that I have created a separate database called as Spotfire. So I would need to look for my database here, Spotfire. Rest of them are, there are system generated databases. So I would not, care more about that. So I'll select Spotfire and click on OK. There was no error, so connection got established, very easily, and it provides us this, this window called as views in connection. It shows that essentially what the connection that we have made. So what are the different tables or views available, in these connections to be used. So for us, we have these three tables here. So what we can do is that we can individually add them here. And once the tables are added and selected here, it automatically shows all the columns that it has on the right hand side. So again, similar to Excel file, we can check and check different columns which are needed and which are not needed. We can define a primary key if needed, so which one or not. Essentially, it does not make much sense essentially, but yes, when we are working with the streaming data, so in those cases, at times we would need to define the primary key, and I'll tell you later actually why is that. So I will add returns also. So returns, and what I'll do is I'll straight away press in OK. So both the two tables are being loaded here. It's the final click, one click. We are just before one click here. So but there's one thing which you may have noticed. So essentially, this add as new data table. So this option, we get when there is at least one single table already loaded in the Spotify. Because if there is no data loaded, so obviously the first data would be a new table itself. But when there is one table, at least one table is loaded, so after that, all the tables that we load, it gives us options for this one. Either we want to add a new table, or we are just trying to add to the same table. Next is external. So essentially, the in-DB connections are external in nature. What does that mean? That means that the data is connected directly with the database to the Spotify client. Here, the Spotify server is nowhere in picture. So that's why when we'll work with a large volume of data, and we're connecting with directly connecting with a database, keeping it external, we can see that the data load time is real fast. When we compare it with the in-memory connections. So that's why external. And I'll in this drop down, you'll see that we have few other options, and I'll also tell you that what these options actually this implies to. Okay, so for now I'll just click on now. If I open this data analysis and just try to look into what are the different table I have, the drop down, it says I have three different table: order, returns, and this is a sample superstore orders. This is for the Excel. So just for the sake of our understanding, for to which table is means being what is the source coming. So what I'll do, I'll just rename the table in a way that it would be easier for us to understand which is from where. So what we can do is that one way was to rename the table while we were loading the table, right, essentially, but we didn't do that. So what is the other way left? The other way left is to do that from the data table properties. And where we do find that, that is at the top menu. We see this data option. when we click on this data, there are different kinds of properties that we can see here. And again, I will be going in very detail about each of the properties, what they do, because these are very, very important, each of the properties. So right now, my focus is on data table properties. And once I have the data table properties, it gives us, all the listed, all the tables which are imported into, and some other informations, very important. And how those are important, again, that's a separate topic. Just right now, my focus is to rename it. So how I can rename it? I can just select any of the table I want to rename, and I can click on rename here. So what I'll do is that I'll rename orders, and I'll put in hyphen, and I'll just say Excel. I'll rename orders, and I'll just add DB. Similarly for returns. All right. So now we have the data, added, and we know, how we can connect our data with the SQL or CSV, or even with any of the database. But there are few things that we would need to compare. That in case when the need be, how would we do that? For example, this is the Excel order. So let me load another Excel file, just so that I can showcase you what I'm referring to. So I'll add the returns this time, add as a new table. I'll just, rename it here itself, returns hyphen Excel. So now we have total 4 different tables. So now my intention is that if and for order and Excel, I had brought this returned onto this order table, so that we would know, which order ID has been returned, which are not returned. So for that, what we did was we went to the data canvas from the bottom left corner, and here at the top we just navigated to the table, in this case order Excel, where we want to add the column, and then click on this plus sign from here, add column, because I want to add the column from returns. And since return is already the return table is already loaded into the report, so I would not do that same again. So I'll use the existing copy. So I'll go to other and returns. So one thing, let me go back again, or you can notice right now, is that in the other, it's showing here only 2 tables, and both of them are from Excel. The reason for this is that this information is being picked from the memory of this part file. And since those tables which are being connected from the database, the Microsoft SQL Server database, those are external in nature, from client to client. So the server doesn't know, essentially that, there is something called as those tables, and what are, data in them, or what are different calls in them. So it would only display only those tables which are imported, or which are in memory. So right now I would want to add from returns. So I'll select returns. I click on this settings, just for the mapping, like which should be mapped with which one. So since again the column names are same here, so it would automatically map. So I would not need to do manually or anything over here, since it has only one column. And so again, nothing to do about that. And again, since this is a one-to-one mapping between the, if you look into the data very carefully, you would find that this is the data is about the order ID, and which order ID, what product has been sold, and essentially what is the price, what is the sales, what is the profit being made out of that. And in the return table, for each order ID, if order ID has been returned or not. Essentially, it has only those order ID which has returned. So essentially, this is a very a common sense to say that one order ID would be returned only once, right? Because again, if we go and make another order, it would have a separate order ID. So one order ID cannot be returned twice. So essentially, that is a one-to-one mapping between the order ID, order table, and the return table. So in that case, a left outer join or a left single match join would not make a difference. In both the sense, it will give us the same output. So for the very same reason, I'm just not changing any configuration here. And I'll click OK. So with this, we can find that I'll go to the properties again to see the columns, and I see the return has been added. Perfect. So we have this return information. Okay. Now what I'll do is that I'll go to my other tab, and this time I want to open the data. But not from the order Excel, but order DB. And also I would open the table plot for returns DB. So we see, one additional information being displayed here because this is an external connection, and when the connection is made from the external for a table plot, it's not for all the visuals. For a table plot, if you're looking at the data in a tabular way, it would max it would show 10,000 rows at a time. So that's why it's displaying this. But now, if I want to do the same thing, what I did for the Excel, so the data that I have imported for the Excel, bringing in the column from return to order ID, how can I do that? So if I go to data canvas again, and I'll just try to order DB. Okay, this is order DB, and here I want to add the column from return, but I don't see a plus sign here. So this is the limitation. I was talking about when we use an external data or in-DB data and between in-memory data, because when we are loading the data to a server, it slows down the data. The data load. That's understand, but it gives us enormous different features to do. So we can add columns, we can add rows, we can add transformations. So many things can be done in that case. But here we don't see those things. But again, you may ask me a question. We don't have say that we can't. The situation is such that the only connections available for us would be external. How would we achieve the same thing if you want to do that? So in that case, the only options left for us would be bringing those things into the same table before the data is loaded. Okay, so merging both these two tables before it is loaded. So how we can do that? So for that, we would need to go back to our connections. So let's make another connections, and then we can see. So I'll go to these files and data again, and I'll go to connect to, and again I'll just come down to locate Microsoft SQL Server, where it is, and I'll go see this is this connection is already existing Microsoft SQL Server, but and it has these two tables. I just want to create a new connections. Okay, connect Spotfire automatically picking up. Now what I want to do is that again, if I just directly add columns, so it would be a very similar thing what we have done. So the columns in these both these two tables would be remain isolated to each other. So what we can do is that at the top we have this option for this custom query. We can go to this custom query, and we can just write a new custom query. So we can just write order returns query, and here we can define write our own customized query to whatever data manipulation that's needed, that can be done. And it can be a very simple a very simple state select query to joins or maybe complex subqueries. So anything can be so I'll start with writing select whatever columns is needed to be pulled. So what I can do is that I will define the columns later. First I'll define from which table I want to do that. So left join returns, I'll give an alias to this return, and what is the joining condition between these two would be the order ID. So it would be order ID from this equals to return dot order ID. So this is the mapping conditions, and what I want all the columns from the order and the returned column from the returns. So what I can say is that ord dot star and ret dot returned. So I'm selecting everything from ord, so order table. So that's why ord dot star and only the return from ret. Because I would not want to again bring in the order ID. That's already part of the order table. So no reason to have the same column again. And I'm performing a left join with the returns on and mapping them both based on the order ID from both the tables. So I'll just try and verify this, and it says perfect. It's verified, and see the columns is pulled, and see we have the returned here. I'll click on OK, and you see here. So essentially I had added orders in return just to showcase you. I don't want that. I just need this query because order and individual order and return table are already part of our analysis. So I'll click on OK. We can rename this as even that was fine itself. So now if I look at the order returns query, so now if I look at, so we have all the columns from both these two tables combined. So this is how we can do it from if the data is external, and if you want to add any columns from any other two table. Now, there is another way. There's another way of doing the same thing, but again, there is a cost for that, and I'll show you what is that. Without writing the query, similar to what we did with the Excel file, going to the data canvas. But how we can do that? So for that, I would need to bring in create another connections. This is just for showcasing you how different we can do the same thing in different ways. And once we have our understanding clear with this connections part, I'll be removing all those unnecessary duplicate or redundant table from here. So SQL Server, and I can just select the first one, click OK. Now I will rename them here itself, orders from DB, but this time I would not keep it external. I'll keep it as imported. That means I'm making a connection with the database, but I'm importing the data to the server or to the memory of the spot file. So that's why I imported. So with this, since the data is, will be, the spot file would know that, okay, we have this data with us and what all we can be done. So since order DB already existing, so automatically it has appended to with that. So what I'll just do is DB imported. Okay. Same thing for this. I'll keep this as import and DB imported. Now let us open order DB imported, returns DB imported. So you see, it's not saying giving us the same option, like same information, like only 10,000 rows can be displayed, because right now it's not external to Spotify. It has it's in there in the system, and now the Spotify understand the data, and it says that okay, now you're allowed to do different things with it. So if I go to the data canvas now and I see order DB imported, so this is again the data sources, but the only difference between this and this is that here we don't have a plus sign, even it's the source is same. But if I look at order DB imported, we have this plus sign, it the option to add rows, columns, or any kind of transformations. The only drawback I would say is that in this case is that since the data volume as of right now we have around 10,000 rows, a bit less than 10,000 rows, so it's not taking too long to importing the data. But say that we have data in millions or billions, in that case importing the data would take a very long time. So in such cases we would need to consider what can be better options. In some cases the load time, those can doesn't matter, but the feature matters, because there may be so many different transformations within the report, or the use of functions within the report are more. So we would may want to consider which one to use and when. So again, it's the same thing. Since we have this, so it's available to be added, and again, those will be available in the table analysis, unlike the previous order return table, which were external in nature. So no change here whatsoever. I'll click OK, and we have everything here. So far we have, we know how to now add data from Excel. If it is CSV or TXT, it's the same way. It's just the changes in the file format. But the data, once it is imported to report, or how the data is imported, it doesn't changes with that. After Excel, we know how to copy the data from a clipboard, and also we know how to make a connection with a database, in this case a Microsoft SQL Server. How things changes when the connection is external in nature, and if it is external, how if needed, if the nature of the data is such that it cannot be directly brought from the table or views. In fact, we would need to write some query. So where we can write those queries, and in case of if you want to perform any transformations after the data has been loaded, if it is in DB connections, so how we can make them imported and then perform the transformations. So this is the one thing. Now there is one more thing for the data load.
Just a quick info, guys. Intellipaat provides Business Intelligence Master's Program in partnership with Microsoft, the course link of which is given in the description below. Now, let's continue with the session.
Which is there, and that is again I know it's like it's uses are not to that level essentially, but it is very important. So it gives us a very good I would say a capability to handle the data we want to. And what is that? I will tell you. There may be situation. Let me explain you this way that there may be situation that we have when a data is loaded, we have a way to filter the data essentially. Okay, so we can filter and data would automatically respond to the filters. But this is just for the report. Let's say that okay, this is an order Excel. So I'll look into order DB imported. So when we filter anything, you see it just filter out everything. It says 0 of 9994 rows. But again, this is for the report thing that it's not displaying anything since data is filtered out. But still, the data is all there within the report. It says 0 of 9994 rows. It knows that it has 9994 rows with the data, even though it's not displaying anything right now. But still, the data is there. So there may be situations where we would say that okay, at any given point of time, we don't want to see all the data. The requirement can be such that we always have to make a choice what kind of data we want to. Then in that case, why to bring all the sets of data within the report? Why don't we get only those tuples or those records for which the selections has been made? So again, if such situation arises, again, Spotfire provides a way to do things, and that is called as a data on demand. And when we say that we have to make a choice, what can be the choice? What can be the choice in such cases? So choice can be, say that let's say for this instance that we have this order table. But when we want to look into the return table, we don't want to look into all the data at once. Only few records would be necessary, and for that we want that only the selected record or maybe the selected order ID would need to be displayed. So in such situations, we can set this data on demand on the return table. And what can be done essentially is that how we would choose, how would make our choice. That depends on how we are, setting up. So the choice means where we are making the selections. It can be a filter panel. On the filter, the other choice can be marking. So this is the selections I made. So based on these selections, only the return table would populate. So from the marking, like I selected this row. So this row says order ID. So I can map it, okay, with the order ID, and the data in the return table would populate only based on that. But the difference in a drill down and a data on demand is the same, that in drill down, it restricts the data, but the data still sits within the report. In a data on demand, the data populates based on the choice or based on the selections made here. So it would populate only those sets of records where the conditions is matching. So this is second way other than filter panel. Third way is we can use some hard-coded value. Fourth way it can be is that we can do that with the help of some text box or a drop down where we can make a selections. So I'll show you all of them one by one how those things are being handled. Okay, so today there's one thing that a same copy, we are going to have a duplication of same table so many times. So since I already have this order DB imported, okay, and I want to set the data on demand only for return table. So what I'll do is that essentially I'll just load the return table, and those cannot be done. There's one thing: the data on demand cannot be done on a flat files, Excel or CSV. So that is one limitation. It can be only from a database or data source connections. I just want the returns, so I would need to make a new connection in that case, and I'll bring only returns here. Now I'll rename this as returned DOD. So it's kind of abbreviation, not abbreviation, I'd say, but my defined abbreviation, DOD as in data on demand. And instead of external, I'll select data on demand here. So as soon as I select on demand, it gives me this settings and this kind of a warning. So warning says that no parameters are defined. Why is that? Because yes, as I said earlier, I would need to make a choice. I would need to make a selections. Data on demand, but based on what? Based on what is the selections parameter. So for that, I would need to configure settings. Now this says that we have two different columns here. So what would be the selections point here? So it would be obviously order ID, because we don't have a return column in other tables, right? It's we have order ID column in common. Now we can define our input. So where input can be. So you see, it can be, different. What can be the value? It can be a value from a column, range from column. It can be a values. It can be fixed. So essentially, this is where we make our choice. Say that we want to do the same with the marking. Like when we mark on the order table, only the marked or selected order ID from the order table, the values, corresponding to that in return table should populate. So in that case, this would be selected. If not, then we can make the selections if we want to do that from the filtering panel, that the data which are filtered on the order table, only the values, the orders corresponding to that should populate from the return table. But let's do that from marking first, and we'll see how this would work. Now I will obtain another table. So now if you see returns DOD, it says 2 columns, but 0 of zeros. You see the difference between filtering and data on demand. In filters, when you filter, it would, the first value, the number of rows displaying would decrease or increase, but the total number of rows remain intact actually. So this means that, okay, we have these many rows, but when it is data on demand, it would just say 0 because nothing has been loaded so far. It would be loaded instantly based on our selections. If I make a selection here, okay, maybe we don't have a, yes, we don't have a matching column for that. So let's say I made a selection here and we have data loaded from the, so now it says we have only 1 rows. So this is one of the mechanism, just to when the situation matches and the data can be loaded based on the selections. So data on demand can be a very good choice in such a situation. Now, apart from that, what else can be, apart from marking, what else can be done? So for that, what I would do is I'll go to this returns DOD and I'll just click on these 3 dots here. I just need to select the source, and on the 3 dots, when I click it, it will give me an option to replace that data source or to go to on-demand settings, or we can add transformations here. So I can go to the on-demand settings and I can just define just my input here. And instead of marking, I would just say active filtering. So since marking was selected, so it was waiting for the input. So now it should automatically populate. Right now it's populating everything because nothing has been filtered out. But when we start filtering out, we can just so that is another way of data on demand. What other way we can do that? The other way we can do that is to say that let me showcase you a way in Spotfire, similar to how we have other visuals. We have text area. I said that, okay, this is a kind of a blank area. It's not a visual, but we can write some title descriptions, add some some informations to the report, some stories, or even we can add some UIs like button or text boxes or drop downs. I'll show you actually how we do that, essentially when we go more in detail with all the visuals and specifically the text area. Because this would be very handy when we will start working on the scripting part, essentially. So, but just for this situation for return on demand, I'll just show you how it works. So I'll click on this text area. You see this text area automatically give me a blank space. Now what I can do is that I can just right click on this blank space and it gives me different options. So I'll just go to edit text area. The other way to do that is to directly clicking on edit here. Once this edit text area is open, you can see at the top it gives us different options. We can write anything straight here, or we can add anything from here, like the background color, image. This is action control. So I'll in detail I will explain you each and everything. Right now my focus is on the drop downs or the list boxes or the text boxes that can be used. So let me use the drop down list here. I'll use a drop down, and when I select anything on from the list here, it takes me to this property control essentially. So this is essentially when I use I create any of the UI, it asks me to create a document property, and I'll explain you why that is needed essentially. This is required just to let the Spotify know that what is the selection made. So when we create a drop down boxes, okay, what is the value selected in that? Okay, how would the Spotify know? So in Spotify, what happens is that a drop down or a text boxes or similar kind of UI. When we create it, it is linked to a property called as document property. So it's more like a variable essentially to store some values. So when we create and link a document property to a UI to a UI control or called a property control, what happens that the selections made here, if I select something on the drop down, that value will automatically come and sit here. I'll show you. So I'll just create a new and property name, and this is just to make selections of my order ID. So I'll call this order ID drop down, and there can't be any space, and we need to select what kind of data it's going to hold. So this is order ID is a categorical value, so string in this case, and I don't have to define a value straight away. Okay, now since I had selected a drop down, so this gives me what would be the value in this drop down. Are we going to hard code any values in the drop down, or it would be coming from some data? So in our case, it should have the order ID, right? So order ID is from, so order ID is column name. So that should come from return, it should be orders DB order ID. So this will display everything, all the orders from the order ID. Fine. So right now I just created a drop down which will have a list of orders from the table. Okay. Now if I make any selections, nothing will happen because I haven't defined yet that what this is just making a selections. But when I have made a selections on the drop down, I said that there's a document property I created for this with a name order ID drop down. So this selected value will you will find that selected value will be stored on that document property. And how we can see that? For that, we need to go to File, Document Properties, and in here we have other different options, different informations. I would need to look into the properties. I see here order ID dropdown, and this is the value selected in the dropdown. So next, if I want to make use of this dropdown, the selection in this dropdown, what essentially I would do is that I would need to make use of this document property. I can make this Spotify understand that for this data on demand on the order table, display only those order ID which are selected in this dropdown or which are stored in this document property, which is linked to this dropdown. So we know what is the document property name, which is connected to this dropdown, and the name itself is order ID dropdown. So now I can link this data on demand instead of marking or filtering to this dropdown. So I'll click on again. I'll go to on demand. I'll go to define input, and instead of values from column, I'll say it's a fixed value and a fixed value from. So we can just hard code the value here. We can write an expression here or the property. This is the property where we can define our document property. So I'll just select this property, go to select. This will give me a list of all the document property we have so far. The first two is the default, the system generated, document property. And I'll explain you again, what does that mean essentially. But the third one is just created by us with the drop down. So any reference to this document property means a reference to the drop down that we have connected. Okay, so I'll just need to see what are the, so when we make a selection, so which is already present in the return table, it will automatically populate those value. For instance, CA 2017. Okay. Essentially, the number of order IDs are more, and a drop down would supposedly it displays only 2000 values at a time, so it's not displaying all of them. So a better situation for this case can be to use a input field instead, where we can just, and I'll just attach the input field to the same drop down document properties, and I'll just remove the drop down from here. So now anything selected over this text box will automatically be stored there. So now if I'll say CA 2017 -158729, so the value selected here would automatically populate here. So it's more like all the settings within the same within the data on demand is more similar actually. It just what is the need and which one to use at what time. So as in it has given all the options that is readily available in Spotify that we can do for the connections. So far, I know that you won't be having a database, but let me know if you are facing any difficulties with loading the Excel file onto the report or onto the dashboard. So, all right. So now we have both both these two tables are added to the report, what I would want you to add both these two tables alongside. So what we would need to do is that we would need to want to go to visualization type on the left hand side and click on table, and we'll do that twice to add two tables. We just need to make sure that we have not added the same table twice. If that is the case, we will just change this to the second one. Okay, now we'll do the same thing again. We'll go to on the bottom left corner, we'll click on the data canvas, and we'll open the order Excel, because this is where we would want to always we would need to be understand this, that we would always open on the drop down here that table where we want to add. This is the target table essentially, not the source one. The data would be coming from source, so the data from source would be added later, but here it would be the target one. So in our case, we want to add from return to order. So order here. Once we have selected order, we would need to click on this plus sign here, and this will give us an option to add columns. So we'll be selecting column, and when we select that column, the data panel will automatically populate here. We don't want to browse the local file again. Okay, we would go to other and select the return from there, because again there's no need to have the copy of the same data again. So we can do that actually. Right now you can add another copy of the return from worksheet from the Excel, either way, but this is just for our understanding, for future sake, once we start working on the real time and the data size matters. So having a duplicate copy of the same table can increase the load on the report. So better to select, go to others and select the returns from there. Once that is done, it would automatically open this window. Actually, it would ask to open this window. Need to configure there. So when we click on the settings, we'll get this window. And essentially, right now, we don't want to do anything here, because this has been automatically picked by the Spotify itself based on the name of the column. We click on OK. And once we click on OK, you'll see that, how a graphical representation of how and, what is the source, and, the data is coming from where, and what has happened in between, and what is the final output. All right. So once we are done with this, after that, you'll see that in the order table, you'll be able to find one additional columns that is called as returned. So this operation is, very similar to what we did, a couple of minutes earlier, when we wrote this custom query while connecting or the data with SQL Server and with an external connection. So this is very similar to the same operation, what we call as a join operation. So adding columns, very similar to join operation. Similarly, adding rows in other operation, which can be done, and it is very similar to the SQL union or union all that we do. Essentially, instead of adding the columns, the column name would be remain same. The number of columns would remain same. It's just that more data would be added to the same table. So essentially, what you can try doing is that again, since we have loaded this order Excel, can we again go to this data, files and data, and browse local file and select our Excel file sample superstar, sample superstore, and select the order worksheet from here and click on OK, and just see what happens. You'll be provided this window, which we get every time, while we add the data, but something different happened this time. And what happened this time is, most of the time, when we add a table, it says that as a new data table, right? Add as a new data table, but this time automatically it was selected as add as rows to and order Excel. This was automatically selected. What does this mean? This means that Spotify recognized the data, so well that it is able to follow that when we are loading this table, it says that the kind of column, the number of columns, and the type of columns, the name of the column is very similar to what we already have loaded in the report. So it says that it thinks or it consider that, since we already have a table, so do we need another table, or are we going to just concatenate or perform a union operation or adding to the same rows? So essentially what happens is that when two tables with the exact same structure, when we say the structure, that means the number of columns, the data type, or the name of the columns matches exactly. There may be difference in the number of rows that we have in both the tables, but even the structure should be alike. And when that happens, so Spotify automatically decides to concatenate the rows of both the two tables into one. So in that case, if we want to do that, we can just click on add as rows to, and what will happen is that it will add all the rows again to the existing. Now we see that the number of rows has, essentially here it doesn't make any sense because we are adding the data from the same table onto each other. But there are maybe situations where while performing the transformation or while performing the data model, we would need there are data sources from multiple different tables would have the same feature, and we would need to maintain the granularity of the data. So essentially we would need to concatenate and merge them everything into the same single table. So in such operation, adding rows would be would come handy. So but I'll just undo it. I don't want to do that. So that is one way for adding rows. Another way is the same, by going to the canvas and click on this plus sign and add rows. So you can select your browse a new file, or you can select from the already existing, and what that will do is that it will add all the essentially or add all the rows just beneath the existing table. The only difference between these two is that first option that we what we got when trying to import the same file. Let me show it to you again. Yes, this option add as rows to, when it gets automatically, this happens when the structure matches. But there may be situations where the structure of the two tables, the source and the target tables, are not alike or not very similar. There may be few couple of row columns which are similar, but still we want to perform this concatenation. So in that case, that's more like a forceful concatenation, and in such cases we would need to do that from the canvas. So in such cases, you can add rows with to a target table from other table where the structure doesn't match or doesn't exactly match. But yes, we would need to be very sure that at least few of the columns should be there, because else the value in the columns would differ essentially. So half of the table will have will have a values differ from what being that the column actually saying. When I say that, I'll just try to show you what I mean. So let's say I have this. Okay, what is db? No, it's this also. So what I'll do is that I'll just remove this joins. So now let's say that we have already performed this, columns and added columns from return. Let's say I'm just trying to add rows from return. Okay. Now both these two tables are different, and they have the different informations altogether. So say that right now we have this order ID same, so this can be concatenated. But what happens is that essentially for the return column, you see it doesn't find any matching reference in the order. So what that will do is that it will add a separate column for returned. But since there is no matching, this is a new column and there is no matching column in here. So what will happen is that for all the rows that we have in the order, for those rows, it will be completely blank. And it will just start from there where, the existing rows of the order table ends. So this is more like, adding the data just beneath the existing data. So from the canvas can be done, when it's more like a forceful adding of rows, not already picked by the system, or there's sometimes when the system picks it up, but we tend to ignore it and we tend to bring it as a separate data table itself. And later we come back to the canvas and do the same thing here. Because so many times what happens is that when we are loading the data, we ourselves we don't know that what operations would needed to be performed at a later point of time. So doing anything straight away without knowing the data can be can be difficult, and also any data model incorrectly done will just add on to our difficulties at a later point of time, and we may need to just redo everything. So few things when we do that while just loading the data is when we are very well aware of how the data and how our data model is going to be. When we don't know that, then it's better to load everything individually first into the report and then perform the data model and whatever the joins or the concatenations, adding rows after that. All right, by now we have all the required data within our environment, and they are ready to be utilized for our further analysis. So a table plot, the Spotify treats it as a visual itself, and those can have a different configuration in different pages, or in the same pages altogether. But a changes to a data table would reflect changes to all the visuals, be it table or be it bar chart or be it any kind of visuals, would reflect automatically to the visual. So this is a table visualization from here, from the visual type. And the one that we see here, order Excel, the name order Excel is a data table. Is here data table. So any changes to the data table, be it the name of the columns, be it the structure, be it any different operations, would automatically reflect everywhere where this data table is being used. Now I'll just move to the next visual category that we have in the group. So that is a cross table. So essentially, when we select any visuals, okay, if it is a table plot, if we are selecting a table plot, it would automatically populate all the columns that it has while loading the visual. For any other chart other than the table plot, it automatically picks the suitable columns, and there is no criteria essentially what it is going to pick actually. So essentially what it does that in case of a cross table, we have access on the multiple areas, unlike a straight table. What we can see, it has only the columns at the top and then we have data down below. But a cross table or a pivoted table, in other few other BI tools, it is called as pivoted table or pivot table. In Spotify, it's called as cross table, and they mean the same here. So essentially, what it does is that it has columns at the top, it has columns at the left hand side, and then it has values in between essentially. So this is more like the matching values, you can say. Depends on the kind of functions or expressions that we have defined on the cell values. So it has horizontal axis, it has vertical axis, and it has cell values. Okay. So essentially, for the horizontal axis and the vertical axis, it picks automatically categories, with lesser values. So it looks for all the columns in the data table, and it says that what are the two categories, which have very limited number of unique values. So in this case, it says that shipping mode has only 4 different categories, while segment has only 3. So it's to it deems okay to pull this information. And we have this sales, we have profit and other measures. So automatically what comes the first in terms of measure, it would automatically pick that one. So now what it depicts essentially. So the value in the cross table, unlike a normal table, are always aggregated.
Just a quick info, guys. Intellipaat provides Business Intelligence Master's Program in partnership with Microsoft, the course link of which is given in the description below. Now, let's continue with the session.
So essentially, it means that the categories from the top and categories from the left hand side, whatever the matching values, this means that for the segment called consumer and the shipping mode first class, these are the total sales been done 159162. So similarly for all of them. Now let us look into the properties for this one and go in more depth. So what I'll do again, it's very similar how we did for the table. Either I can right click and look into all the informations and go to properties, or else directly from the top bar of the visual I can click on the settings and I can come here. Now again, general data, I'm going to skip this now. For all the visuals, they would be very similar, no changes in terms of the title description and the table marking, limiting, limit of expression, the filtering, those will be very same. So you can just go and try few things here, like how it works, what happens when essentially when you mark something and you limit it somewhere. So how it responds, how it communicates between each other, how we can use different expressions to limit. So those things you can try, and moreover, what I would give more stress on marking and limiting, because from my experience, I feel that this is somewhere that most of us we gets confused essentially. That it looks like the same thing at both the places, but how they differ. So this would need some practice from your end. So let's directly move to appearance. So again, appearance is a category within the properties, which is we'll find in all the visuals, but the settings differ with different visuals. So for a table, you'll have a different settings altogether for appearance and for cross table. It depends on the kind of visuals we're using. So displaying show cell borders and allow table data to export in spot lines. These two are common even in the table plot. Apart from that, we can see the scrolling is also common, but for the table plot, it's just the scrolling from left to right. We can freeze from the top, vertical scrolling, we can't freeze. So there's nothing called as horizontal scrolling or vertical scrolling for a table plot, essentially. But for a cross table, we have this horizontal scrolling. And in that, what can be frozen and what node. So before that, if there is if there are empty values, for now I can see that all the values have some or the other sales values, but say that there are some categories for which there are no sales made, or for which there are no data in our table. So in such cases, how we would want to display, either it can be blank or it can be whatever defined here essentially. So if the custom text is selected, in that case this would be instead of values, if it is blank, you will be able to see only a hyphen here. Again, this is checked, use separate color for marked items. That means when you select something, select cell, it will automatically be marked or selected in a different color, and that color depends on the marking we have selected. So it's blue here, so it's blue. But if we just uncheck this, so in that case it would be highlighted but not with color, it would just be highlighted, and the rest of all of them would be grayed out. So this feature is similar across all the visuals. Now about horizontal scrolling, this is to adjust automatically, but I can essentially freeze the rows header. So essentially we have, now if I just scroll, so this is the rows header, so this is frozen, so this could not move. Okay, now we'll move to formatting. So formatting is an option, this option will be available with those visuals where there would be some kind of calculations involved. There would be numeric, especially numeric values will be used. So essentially what kind of formatting it does is that the output of the calculations, essentially how we want to display them on the screen, essentially do we need to just display as it is the outcome of the output, or is it a currency, so we can add dollar or INR or any currency to it, or we can just convert it into a percentage. So or more into scientific, or it is just a straight number, or any custom formatting that we may want to do. And I'll show you all of them, what they means to us. So essentially, you see that this is the formatting and format by cell values. So essentially, in a cross table, if you look at different axes, the cell value means the calculation part, and it is the bottommost axis. This is the cell values, and the other two are the horizontal and vertical axis. If you go to axis directly, you see that a segment. This is the horizontal axis, and ship mode is the vertical axis. Sum of cells is the cell value. So when you look at the formatting, by default it will be selected the cell values, and whatever calculations involved in our visuals would be selected. Now what we can do is that we can just the default is the general, so nothing to do here. But since this is sum of cells, right? So we can select actually, okay, this is something which is referring to a currency. So we can append, just at the beginning, a currency. That depends on what kind of currency, or what is the location or in picture. Based on that, we can just select currency from here, from the list, and it will automatically displays that. So right now INR is selected. Apart from that, what is the decimal, the after the decimal, how many values do we need to see? So again, if it is auto, so whatever is the outcome, the exact outcome, it will display as it is. There's no restrictions on the number of decimals, places. But at any point of time, we can just, we don't want to display, it will be 0. So it will automatically round off to the nearest integer. And how we would like to display them. Then again, if the values are too large, essentially, it needed to be very large, but again, it's more than 1,000 or more than 10,000, or say a lakhs, or a million data. In that case, we can add a comma, a separator, between the digits of the values, to make it more readable. So for that, we can just use this 1,000 separator. So automatically it will append commas at all the places where needed. Now there may be situations that the values are too large, and we would not want, we would just need to add the information at very higher level, essentially, that okay, it's 7 million, that would do. I don't need to look into the very the smaller of the digits what's involved in the calculation. So in such a case, what we can do is that we can just check this, use short number format, and automatically what it does essentially is that based on the values it has, essentially, it will automatically append a million or k, and there's nothing that we can do about it. It automatically picks, essentially, what better to display. So there are some certain times where situations where the user asks us actually that, no, essentially, can this be uniform? At places it's saying 1,000, and at some places it's saying million. So so for that we have this custom formatting, and we'll look into that also. But for this short number format, it picks automatically depending on the size of the value. So it gives us based on our complete selections here, it provides a sample information of that. Next is percentage. There may be at times situations that we are not exactly displaying the exact number, but we are displaying the values in terms of percentage. It can be anything, like we would need to find the percentage of the consumer and first class against all, within all the segments, or it can be within all the shipping mode. So it can be vertically, or it can be horizontally, or within all the data available. So anything can be requirement. So in such cases, the output, we can just select the percentage after adding our calculations. If we just select percentage, it will just multiply our number with 100 and add a percentage. So that would not be the way. The percentage would only means that we would need to define our calculation, and then only this would work perfectly. Essentially, this what just does is that this just multiply the current value with 100 and add a percentage. So it is itself, by itself, it's not doing any calculations. So if you want to display the value in percentage and how the percentage will be calculated, whether be it on the same category or whether it or at the overall level or at what is the hierarchy of it. So based on that, we would need to rewrite our expressions. And again, in this case, we have just this information to add a decimal places. Scientific is nothing but again it's just that how in the calculator if the values are too large, so automatically it adds e the scientific and value and automatically based on the decimals. So you see how it's being displayed the scientific way. So this is something I have never used in my experience so far. The numbers, so it would be straight as it is value without changes. It just controls 2 or 3 different things, very similar to currency, I would say, but it's just that we don't have this currency symbol here. So we have the decimal, we have the thousand separator, we have the short number format. Last is the custom. So this is more like how we want to display. So say that we want to display all the values in millions, so we can just add /m. So it will add a m that is million to all. But again, if you look at the data, it just it makes no sense essentially. Essentially it's not converting to million. Essentially it's this exact the same data, it's just appending a m. So in that way, okay, there's no problem. Let me check this actually. So what would the exact format? And so for now, I'll just skipping this custom part. Maybe I'm a bit rusty with these settings, so I would need to revisit and see. So this is about the formatting, and then the fonts. So again, the fonts are like similar to all other visuals. It's just that depending on the type of visuals, we have different kinds of access or colors or different things coming into picture for different things. So similarly, we can just change the fonts for them, but they work in a very similar way for all of them. Essentially, few of them are would be like description and details visual message would be same across all of them. Rest of them would changes with the type of visuals. Okay, moving to access. Okay, so now this is something we would need to. Okay, yeah. So the axis, as said earlier, so it has a different axis at different places across table. Okay, so we have horizontal axis, we have vertical axis, and then we have the sum of cells. So for all the axes, we can have a single column in place, or we can have multiple columns in for both. We can have multiple columns for segments, for horizontal axis and even for this vertical axis. And simultaneously, we can have multiple calculations defined for the cell value. It's not just the same a single calculation like sum of cells. Simultaneously, we can have the sum of cells and sum of profit as well, or we can have the sum of sales. Along with the sum of sales, we can have the percentage of sales altogether. And again, we can have a horizontal axis without a vertical axis. We can have a vertical axis without a horizontal axis. So this depends on how we are looking at. So essentially, if I just remove segment, it will just give me this overall sum of sales directly based on shape mode. You can add a segment and it will just split the values across segment and will remove shape mode, and it will just straight away calculate based on this segment. So depending on the selections. Also, if we can add more to this, let's say, let's add a region. So automatically what it will do is that for each of the shipping mode, automatically it will split whatever different regions it has, and simultaneously it will split the sum of sales values across, depending on the data. So this is about the the access value. And similarly, you can add more calculations. So as we click on this down arrow, it will allow us to select column of our interest, and once we select any column, we can just also select any aggregations or functions based on the column selections. Without column selection, this would not display anything, as it doesn't know what functions to allow, essentially, because it depends on the data type of the value selected. If it is, let's say, if it is a categorical value, so it will have a few different aggregations But if we select major, then it will have a different sets of functions available. Okay, so this is about the cell value. Now for each horizontal axis and the vertical axis, there are two more things that we can see. One is label rendering and the settings. So the label rendering, if you remember from our session yesterday, for the column, there's a way to display how to display, how do we select to display the categories essentially. So right now, by default, these would be all in a text way. They will be rendered, but there may be times then when this can be have image from some URL, or this will have some URL value itself actually. So either it can be displayed as text or link or image depending on the selections made here. Similar for the vertical settings. Now the settings allows us essentially that what are the categories, how the category would change when the values are filtered essentially, and when the calculation is done, essentially when the calculation is done, would it be done on all the considering all the categories or only on the filtered values. So this is the settings, two settings that is available, and both of them have been the same actually. I'll show you what I mean essentially. Say that let's say I have removed first, that's a wrong table, and order DB imported. Okay, yeah. So I have uncheck first class and same day. So we see that the calculation is being changed based on the selection, but even the categories is also responding to the filter. There's some situations, there's sometimes when uh, it is asked from us that even though we are filtering on something, just filter the data within the table. Don't filter the categories. Let them be. So in those cases, you need to go to the access, and we just need to, since I have filtered on shift mode, I would have done the same in the segment, but I have filtered it from the shift mode. So it would be easier to understand this way. So instead of show filtered values, I'll just show all values. At any point of time, even though if you filter out, the category would remain constant, just the change in data based on the filter selections. But by default, it would be displaying only the filtered values. So if we don't want, so we would have to come and manually change it here. Now again, some the cell values. So again, this is for the writing the calculations. So if you want to change the existing one, you just click on the down button and change your either if it is a straight column aggregation over column, so you can just select the column and aggregation from here, or you can write an expression. If it is a bit more complex than just picking up the column names, so you can just write your expression directly here. Other way to do it is to directly just put the cursor over here, the mouse over here, and I'll just right click on it, and it will give me different option. I'll click on the custom expression, the last one, and this would give me the exact calculations behind this, sum of sales comma sum of quantity. So you can just write your own calculations, change it, update it, or whatever you want to do it. If the calculation is right, when you click OK, you'll be automatically come out without any error, or else it will just throw error, and without correcting it, it will not allow us to come out of it. Either correct it or cancel it. There's a two-way. So this is about the excess. Coming to total. So since this is a cross table, so this is one additional feature called as total. So here we have a way to display the grand total or subtotal with respect to the rows and with respect to columns, both of them. You can add a subtotal, grand total at the extreme right hand side, which would give you the total for each of the columns. And again, you can have a subtotal for rows, which will give you the grand for the rows. So just click on select here and see for columns, it has added all of them, and for rows on the right hand side. It would always come on the extreme right hand side. There are some times when people ask actually that can we bring it in between, or can we bring it just before all the calculation starts, but no, we can't do that. it will always at the extreme bottom or extreme right in either case, and it automatically depends on the total number of grand total automatically depends on the number of calculations involved. Since here we are using two calculations, one for sales and one for quantity, so there would be two grand total for each of them. Similarly, we can go to properties, and within the total, apart from grand total, we have the subtotals to be added for between each category. Okay, so let's go to total, and I'll add a subtotal for shipment. And we see that, since this axis has, two categories essentially, not just the one. So automatically a ship mode has come. So say that, let's say in the horizontal also I add another, I know it doesn't make much sense, but so now since I have added two categories on both the vertical axis and the horizontal axis, and now if I go to total, so I'll see, oh, okay, got it. Oh, yes. So it won't be actually, because it doesn't make a sense essentially. Whatever hierarchy we pass on here, so automatically it will have the subtotals only on, between the values that we have selected at the vertical. So the number of axes that we keep on adding, automatically the number of checkboxes for each of the subtotal will keep on increasing. So irrespective of what has been selected on the vertical axis. So after that, the other thing is that when we select the grand total and the subtotal, at the bottom we see how it's calculating the total values. So essentially what it means is that calculating each individual value and just giving the subtotal, or it is just the subtotal of the overall values essentially. So when we just directly sum the values, it doesn't make much sense in either case. But say that when some other calculations are involved, in such cases, let's say the average. So let's say that the sum of average and the average of all the values would never be same. So it depends on our choice essentially, what we are going to pick essentially, whether those should be the sum of everything, or those should be overall calculations involved. So based on that, we can just select these two options, and the calculations, the subtotal and the grand total will automatically adjust to it. Moving to colors. So the color by in across table is a bit different than what we have seen in table, or what we'll be looking at or seeing in other visuals essentially, because in a cross table there is no way that we can color the categorical values. What I mean is that there's no way we can color the ship mode values, or the region values, or the segment values. Only thing that can be colored are the cell values, and that is based on the rule or the values that we have, that we decide here. So essentially automatically it has already selected the numeric, sum of quantity and sum of cell, because it knows that these are the two calculations we have for this. And based on this, automatically we can just select the values to be displayed. Okay, so gradient, or it can be fixed, it can be segment, it can be fixed. It's similar. Since these are all numeric values, so it will have gradient segments. And apart from what it takes automatically, you can also add more point to it in the between, or else you can add rule. So there may be a situation that we may want to color all the data point with some conditions, but there may be some specific data point which we want to set, something different. In such cases, we can just add a rule in between for those exceptions. So by default, we have all these different options readily available, which can be used, and based on that, automatically we can set our own color choice, and this will work in that way. Then we have the sorting. So since this is a cross table, so we have horizontal axis, we have vertical axis, also axis at the two different areas. So we have sorting at two different places. One, we have sorting for the rows, and the other to sort the columns. So depending on the selections we have made on the both the axis, it will automatically pop up the data accordingly. So for the rows, it will depends on what we have selected at the top, and based on the value like consumer and sum of sales, consumer then some quantity. So how to sort the values in terms of rows. And same goes for the columns. It would be first class and region, same day and then region. Likewise, legend, again, legend it works for the very similar way for all the visuals, apart from a few. Most of them would remain same throughout. So there are a few different visuals for which it changes, like a line chart or a combination chart or a map chart or a KPI with which has a bit of different settings as compared to others. So for those, there may be one or two settings within the legend that would differ, but others would be same. Then we have subsets. Subsets, as in, essentially it means that the calculations that we have, we can define our own subsets of calculations. So right now it says that it is current filtering, as in, so whatever we are filtering, automatically it would respond to this. But at any point of time, you can just make it to all data. So essentially, this would not, respond to filtering at all. It would be, fixed, and not in current filtering, as in it is just the opposite of current filtering, as in what has been, it would automatically display what has been filtered out, not the value which have been filtered. So I had unchecked first class, so it will automatically make the calculation display data based on what has been not been selected. So this is just the way, whether we want to display, we don't want to respond the calculations altogether to the filtering, or we want it to respond. If we want it to respond, in what way, whether we want it to calculate based on the filtered in data or the filtered out data. And then show hide item. So again, it is the same. We can add a rule like what to display and what not to display, depending on different already available functions with us. And apart from that, you can write our if there's something which we think that we would need to write a rule which is we don't find already in the existing function, so we can just go to Boolean expressions and write our own expression for the rule. So this expression writing would be a separate session altogether. Actually, we would need one complete session of 3 hours, essentially, just for the expressions, because we have a variety of different of functions and the use case of those functions, how those are those work with at different places. So this is all about the cross table. All right. Then I'll move to the next one. And for that, again, I'll go to the visual types. Essentially, this is a bit of time taking. I understand that, and it's a bit of, a tedious task. But again, the problem is that all these visuals, they have some or the other different, things which we would need to know, essentially, because or else it would be difficult, again, if we need to do something and we don't know about the exact settings each visuals affect, it works on. So it's, good to give it some time and, go through all the settings so that we know essentially how most of them it works. But after this, most of things, understand that, as you start working, as you start practicing things you'll gradually start to, remember things, essentially what all features we have, what we don't have, and where do we find things. So the next in picture is the graphical table. So again, this is the third kind of table that we have in Spotfire. The first is the table plot, second is cross table, and this is the graphical table. So by the name itself, we can understand, this is a kind of table where we have some way to include graphs. Now, how those graphs works and what all things can be done. So let's look into that. So again, similar way, we can just directly can go to properties, or directly we can go to properties from general and data. Again, same. So I'm just skipping this appearance. So appearance is just if you can just want to display the header row or not. You see, this is the one saying sparkline has gone, and also the ship mode, row header name, cell border gone, hidden rows or not. It depends on this. Since right now the number of we have only these 4 number of rows, so it doesn't matter much. Again, if for when marking, do we need the background to change the color, or it just we want it to highlight the marked area and just gray out the rest of them. So if it is checked, that means it will just
Just a quick info, guys. Intellipaat provides Business Intelligence Master's Program in partnership with Microsoft, the course link of which is given in the description below. Now, let's continue with the session.
fonts. So again, the table text, the headers, and graphical sections of the header section of this part. Then the legend that which has, if we add a description, or if we have a drill down, and we can add a detailed visualization message to it. So for those things, we can just change the font. Now access. So access, again, it's a very similar to cross table. The only difference is that we don't have a vertical axis or horizontal axis likewise. But here we can just add rows at the top, and we can have multiple rows one after another. And then for the graphs or for the calculations, we can just keep on adding here. So by default, it selects, as I said, like it selects automatically one category and sparkline, and within the sparkline you'll see there's some calculation it might have automatically find for or written for itself. So you can add more from here, but for time being, I'm just leaving it just with a single selection for shape mode. Now for the graphical part, the columns, when I click on add, we have these 4 different options to add. Sparkline, we have the calculated value, we have icon and bullet graph. Now what does it mean? Sparkline is more like the lifeline. You see, it's more like over the period of time how the data has changed. The calculated value is nothing but the same kind of how it works in a cross table. We will write a calculation and it will display the calculation as it is. Icon is something in different we can select different shape and different colors, and based on that we can write rules, and for which one it should select it to how it should be displayed. And a bullet graph, so it would again to compare a bulleted. Okay, I see a chat. In cross tab, can we not give different color conditions to sales and other column like quantity? Yes, we can. Okay, let me go back to that again. Page 3. Anything, any calculations or any conditions based on sales and quantity can be done, but we can't do anything about the categorical value, as I said earlier. So if you want to do anything, go to properties and let's go to colors. So as you said that, the color conditions, right? So what is the color condition? That depends on, let's select a fixed values. Okay. And we want that, I want to write a rule. This is just for quantity first. I want to rule that our top 5 values, let's say, just for the sake of, or is that I'm looking at top 5 values. Okay. This is for quantity. I do the same for sales. Okay. So sorry, since this is the part of, both of them are part of numeric, so automatically it has taken that one calculations. But we could have done, bringing both of these individually and writing individual, what I say, calculations for both of them. So those can be like, let me add sum of sales and I would add sum of quantity to individual point. So in that case, I can add a rule for this top 5 values. I want green, rest everything would be in red. For sales, top 5 value, let's say I want it in some shade of blue, rest everything would be in, let's say not in orange but red. So the logic that we are writing, it may change, it depends on what is the conditions that we are setting, but yes, we can write the same logic for both of them together, or or it depends on, like, both of these two calculations can have a separate sets of logics. So those things can be done. And as said earlier, based on the functions available here, we can do write the logic. And there may be situations where we may think of something other than what is already here. So in such cases, we can always go for Boolean expression. I hope I'm clear. So coming back to the graphical table. So the properties and access. So we were discussing about the sparkline. So let's first look into the settings of the sparkline. For for each of the access columns, that we define, it has a separate sets of properties within itself. So now we can see here that a second window or a dialog has been opened for just this sparkline that has been added. And here we have a way to identify whether the data that would be used would be the same data which is referring to this complete graphical table, or it can be something. No, sorry. By data, I meant data limiting, essentially. So whether whatever data limiting that we have identified here, okay, will this be also following the same, or it is going to have altogether a different separate data limiting? So by default, it would follow the same what the parent visual is following, and rest of them it would follow the same way, the same thing as the parent one. It just changes with when we just select the specify a separate data limiting. So automatically everything will be enabled, and we can just write our own sets of expressions or follow a different filtering scheme altogether. Appearance is just that for the this timeline or the spark line that we say that do we need to add a start a point at the start and at the end. So it will just show the values essentially where it is starting and where it is stopping for each of the category. Okay, and then the values of the width of the value, the line width, the line color, we can decide what to select and what not to. So this is about the appearance. The formatting is about the calculations beneath this spark line, how the spark line is being generated, what is the calculation beneath it. For that calculation, how it will be formatted, it's the same thing, currency, percentage, scientific, number, and custom that we discussed earlier for the cross table. Now here is the calculations involved, that how is this spark line being generated. So this spark line is being generated based on sum of cells, and the sum of cells over the period of time, that is order date, monthly, how monthly the sum of cells has been changing or has been growing or decreasing over the period of time. So based on that, it would automatically generated. Okay. There's one important thing about a graphical table, and we have this feature only for two of the visuals out of all the visuals, and that is that we can add action to this visual. Action as in we can add some function to it, we can or also we can when needed we can write our own sets of scripting to it, and when we click on it, it will do those actions. So one is the graphical table and other is the KPI chart. Both of them enable us to write or define a function or write script on that, and I'll show you how that works. So when I go to the spark line or bulleted graph or icon or calculated value, we have same sets of options for each of them. So when I go to actions, by default it's unchecked, perform action on click. If I check it, it gives me action to configure the settings, like what needed to be done when I click on here, any of here, what would happen. Again, that depends on a use case. That depends on a use case, what you want to do essentially. But it can be, in a very small functionality, I can say that you may want to, when you click, you may want to drill down to a different page altogether, wherein you have a more detailed visual of the existing area that you have clicked, more like a drill down, but a cross page drill down, what I'm talking about. So what you can do is that you can just enable actions as in what you want to do. So we have already available functions, like essentially you can if some filters are set, you can just reset them. You can reset the marking if you have already there, or if there are any bookmarks, if you need to call a bookmark, or we just want to navigate to a certain page. Say that in this case I want to navigate to a certain page, so I just click on page, then name of the page. So that means is when I click on any area of here, it will take me to the first page. So this is just to showcase you how functions can be added to this. Not exactly what you would want to do it. There may be at different situations different things can be done. And the last one is the tooltip. So when you hover the mouse over here, what it is going to display on the tooltip. So by default, it has the action and the rows. So essentially, it doesn't mean much action. So the shape mode is same day. So this is about the sparkline. Next, we can add a calculated value to this. Let's say I'm not focusing anything on the functions or on the values what being displayed right now. Okay, so I'm just using the whatever comes to my mind or whatever I see up front. So most of the time we'll be seeing the same kind of calculations throughout, like the sum of sales being used everywhere. Okay, but we'll definitely go through a much more complex versions of the calculations going forward. So you see a calculated value as in it's kind of a straight calculation. We can define the formatting, like how we can similarly, we can add currency or percentage or whatever, and then to the sum of sales you can add a rule to it, like what should happen, what is the rule for each of them, and then same thing for actions and tooltip. Similarly, we have this icon, and again instead of values what we have in calculate column, calculate value, we have icon here, and this icon you can define the icon based on the calculations that you provide. Again, in this case I'm writing sales, and based on the rule, automatically you can provide different colors and what I say shape to the icon. Like we have top one, so we can write bottom one. Instead of star, this time I can just give something like so. And then also we can add actions to each of them. So it's very similar. There's the last item, which is the bullet graph. A bullet graph is more like a comparative, based on the calculations that we define here. It will try to compare the value essentially against this value essentially. So you see this the sum of sales, and based on that, automatically it would be compared against the sum of discount. So essentially, this would not be a right way essentially, because a discount better if I say that sum of discount can be compared against, since discount against discount will always be 100%. So but this would be better if we compare a profit against discount or sales, or a discount against sales, not sales against discount. So where it stands and what they mean essentially. So okay, so based on that, it provides us a way how now we see that this is the total sales value, the bigger line, the vertical, the horizontal lines, and the vertical one are the profit value. So we know that how it's growing, like how the profit are for each of the different shipping mode when it compares to the total sales being made. Okay, so based on that, you can define, your. So this is for the bullet graph, and again, the color ranges and action control. So the color range, again, it's like if you want to display what is the color range, and based on that, you can do things. So this is the four options that we have, within this graphical chart, and a different way of representing the data other than a cross table. So again, we have a legend. So again, it's the very same thing. What we want to display, what not. Subsets is very similar to all of them. So and show item again, same for all. So let's going to the next topic and the next kind of visual that we have, and that is a text area. So again, text area I'll be keeping for the last because there will be so many things that I will need to show you. So I'll go to the bar chart. Okay. So essentially, a bar chart, we know that what kind of essentially when we want to see compare a value essentially over a category, or when we look at moreover we want to look at the aggregated data at a period of time. So in such cases, bar chart would be very helpful. So essentially, it would enable us to straight away understand that, let's say, if you want to see, so at just one go, if you want to look at the data, it would be very difficult for me to look into each and individual year. There will be so many data points for one year. and to calculate them, and then come to a decision that okay, this year the performance is better, and or some other year the performance is going down. But if you want to represent it in a bar chart, in no time I can understand that, okay, even without looking at what is the value it's displaying right now. But I can say, okay, yes, there's one thing, whatever is the reason or whatever not, but 2017 has the highest value so far. And this is against row count, but I would like to see it around some measure. Yes, so in this case, we can easily say that 2016 is the year where we have the highest sales value. Now, looking at the configuration or the settings for this again. So I'll just going to the settings, and again same thing that general data appearance. Yeah, so here this is something for the bar chart. We'll see too many different things on the appearance. And what are they? So in Spotify, we don't have a different bar charts for vertical and horizontal align. So if you look at other PI tools, they would have a separate bar charts for for vertical and horizontal. In Spotify, they have merged it within itself. They have just provided a way for the orientation. By default, it's a vertical one, but if you may want to set the horizontal one, and it would automatically just shift the axis upright. Okay. Apart from that, what kind of bar chart we are looking at essentially. A bar chart can be a normal bar chart, or it can be a stacked bar chart, or it can be 100% stacked bar chart where all the bars would be same, altogether same. The value within the stack within the bars will vary in terms of the values. So that depends on this selections made here. So essentially, you see, when I have selected 100% stack bar chart, automatically all of them have become equally. The only representation of this is that all of these bars are 100% for its own year. So it makes more sense when we provide stacks to this. Then it would it will help us understand what exactly it's referring to. So we'll do that, and we'll see. Then we can define the width of the bar, what suits our background, or the available spaces within the page, or the number of data points. If the years are more, so automatically we would want to have some thinner bar. Okay. Then we have the transparency of the bars, and do we need to indicate the shadow of the bars? You see a very faded shadow you would be able to see. Again, this is the same thing. If you want, when you want to mark whether it will be marked on the same color or not. Now, how the bars will be sorted, the align the bars. When the bars are sorted by values, it would be from higher to lower, irrespective of which year it has occurred. When the reverse bar segment order. And what if there are some missing point within the data? How are we going to compensate that? Do we need to compensate for that or not? Right now, we don't have a missing data between, but if there is any. So this is for the time series essentially. So this is about the appearance. Now going to the formatting. So formatting again, it's the same. So since we have two axes over here, one is category and one is the value axis. So essentially, in layman's term, I would say category axis is the x-axis and value axis is the y-axis. So essentially, they could have named it as x-axis and y-axis, but there's a reason behind it essentially. The main reason behind it calling as category axis instead of x-axis is that the orientation of the bar chart. So right now, if you ask me the x-axis, I can say this is the x-axis and this is the y-axis. But when we change the orientation to it horizontal, so in this case, x-axis is this and y-axis is this, but the value or the column has changed altogether. So they call it as category axis, in which way that irrespective of the orientation, the category axis will remain this, and what value axis will remain this. This is for the category. This is for the values. So for the formatting also, we have formatting for two category axis and value axis. So for category axis, since they're categories, so nothing to do about that. That there will be plain text. But for the value axis, as soon as we select, we can define, around sets of again the same thing, dollar or currency, percentage, or whatever. All right. Then again, the fonts. So we can fonts the skill labels. These are the skill labels. These values are the skill labels. So we can change the font for this. This is the value access level, skill level. This is the category access skill level. Then we have the access title label. Then we have the value access title label. For the bar chart labels, as in right now the labels are not selected. So let's select the bar chart label, and then we can come back to the fonts. So these are the bar chart labels. Trellis. Trellis is something which I'll be explaining. This is more like partitioning our. This is something which we have not seen so far in our previous visuals that we have gone through. This is something which can be used to partition our visuals into different frames, just to for kind of comparative studies based on certain category. So I'll show you what those means. Then again, legend. If there's any lines or curves mentioned in a bar chart, or or most of the charts essentially provide us a way to add a reference lines or curves essentially to just for the comparative value essentially. So say that you can add a average line for here, that with the total average of the overall value. Say that, so that would help us to understand whether each year how is the performance going on, whether are we above the average of overall year, or we are below. So average is just one example I am giving. Actually, there are so many. There are essentially more than 10 different options you'll find calculations to perform for the lines and curves. Then again, description and detailed visualization message, also we can provide the font for that. Now coming to category axis, in a way the x-axis. So it can have the date value, it can have the what I say as the other categorical value essentially. So you can have multiple categories within the same x-axis. So you can select more columns from here. So it would be more into an hierarchical order. Or if it's a date column, so automatically you can select for all the date column you see, automatically we have this small right arrow. So when we click on this arrow, automatically it will give us different way. It's called as time period hierarchy. How do we wish to define? So essentially, right now the order date has the date values essentially, but I have decided to display at the year. But at any point of time, I can select to display the data in hierarchy, like year, quarter, and month. So automatically a hierarchy is created, and just I can select to go up, level up in the hierarchy, or a level down in the hierarchy. Year, this is year, quarter, this is year, quarter, month. Okay. Right now, I'll just go back to year because this would make look more cleaner. Again, for the settings we have, this is very similar to the access that I've showed you. Whether the categories, those should respond to the filter, or those should at all times should display all the values at a time. That depends on here. By default, it would respond to the filter. And then we have, within the category access, we can how to display the labels. Like by default it is horizontal aligned, but there may be situations where there are too many values. So to save some space, we can just set horizontal, so it would be very look very clean in such cases. And then we can just define at any point of time how many maximum labels it can display if there are too many categories in our data. Now there's some concept called as zoom slider. And what does that mean? I'll tell you. Let's say I'll just go back to my previous settings of year, quarter, and month. Okay. Now it's very difficult to get anything out of this essentially. So I have added this, check this zoom slider here. Now I can just go left and right, zooming in the data. Okay. I'll right click on it. We get an option called as reset zoom. It will go back to the normal frame. So this is the feature of the reset zoom option. And we have this option on both the category axis and the value axis. We can add one on the value axis also. We can display grid lines automatically, lines beyond that. And then just, the scale, the reverse scale, or just, how to display. So just the reverse order. Going back to the value axis. So again, same, we can define more calculation here instead of just the sum of sales. If you want to display more, let's just for the sake of clarity, I'll just go back to this category axis and the value axis. Let's say I want to add one more category, sorry, one more value, and I want to also see the sales sum of profit altogether. So the blue is the sum of sales, the red one is the sum of profit. Now coming as a stack chart, but we can have decide, but we can to have a dual scale, and for sum of profit I may want to have a separate scale of its own. So you see on the left hand side we have this scale, because the value, the ranges, the minimum value and the maximum value for both the two measures may differ. So essentially we can have two separate scales, one on the left hand side, one on the right hand side for each of them. The blue says it's for sales, the red says it's for profits. So we can just compare it against this scale, and this will be compared against this scale. Okay. A bar chart is something, when we, over a certain category, when you want to, compare the higher level of information of, of our data or of any measure. So if you look at the current scenario of how this, a bar chart look is that it can be like comparing the sum of sales and sum of profits over the year of the orders, essentially. So how they have grown, or how they have changed over the year, and we can have different color codings for different bars. It can be a group bars, how it is now, essentially two different bars for two different categories. It can be stacked bar, so in that case there will be single bar, but multiple different stacks based on categories. So how we are plotting a bar chart, it depends on what has been asked. So right now, essentially, if you look at the categories, we have two different categories for this bar chart to use. One is the year of order date, essentially how this the number of the groups that would be created depends on the category defined on the x-axis, or better to say the category axis, and the other category is depends on what we have selected on the column by, on the color by. So essentially there can be two measures involved, or we can say two calculations involved within the same bar chart, or only one calculation, but the color of the bars or the color of the stacks or groups depends on some third categories. It can be any other categories like the ship mode, it can be segment, it can be with respect to city, state, region. So whatever essentially we can make selection. So let's do this way. So it's more like an activity, and I would like to have your participation over this from you. I would like to get input from you, and your help to create what we're looking at. So just think of a story. Think of a story where you have been asked, you are communicating with a stakeholder. You're working on a dashboard, and the user of the dashboard would be asking you for your help, essentially to help him create the dashboard. So what he says essentially is that as he's a user of the dashboard, he would want to and let's say this is a data that what we are working on right now. So he wants to say that that he would like to see the sales and profits of the superstore over the year. And so when we say that, I would like to see the sales and profit of the superstore over the year. So essentially, what comes to our mind? What can be a better way of representing this? It can be any of the visual that we have already covered. It can be anything else that whatever comes to your mind, because we have multiple different visuals available. So essentially, my take from here is when we say the sales and profit over the year, essentially. So for each year, so that is one category that I can see from here. I have. Okay. So we have this one category from here. We have the same. Now we know we have two different measures, sales and profits. But the question is, for each year there can be multiple transactions, multiple sales, and for each sale there will be multiple profits. So what would be the better aggregation, I would say, to be used essentially? Because there may be two things out of this essentially. One is for each year, when we say, then obviously we would like to see the total sales and total profit for the year, right? So in that case, sum of sales and sum of profit would be the ideals solution or idle functions to be used. So this is very straight, what we have done in the previous page.
Just a quick info, guys. Intellipaat provides Business Intelligence Master's Program in partnership with Microsoft, the course link of which is given in the description below. Now, let's continue with the session.
Over the year of order date, we have sum of sales and sum of profit. So what I would want you to, I would want you to create a bar chart, essentially. And in that bar chart, we would need to have the year of order date, and then we have two measures for sales and profit. I'll give you 2 minutes for this, because the next activity, what we're going to do over this, essentially, depends on the current scenario. So if you can, do it. And once you're done, you can just let me know over the chat window. So let me do together. So what I'll do, I'll open a bar chart. So by itself, it has taken shipping mode as the category axis and row count. Essentially, row count is a function which essentially counts the number of rows each categories have in the overall data. So what I want essentially is the profit of the superstore over the year. So over the year, for that, I'll change this order date to year of order date, and then sales and profit. So we'll select sales and it will automatically take sum, and I'll take another measure, and this would be profit. Now this has automatically taken the stacked bar chart. So essentially, both of these sum of sales and sum of profit are two different measures. So a stacked bar chart to me doesn't make much sense, essentially, because if you look at, if you provide a label to this, essentially, label, what does the label does? It just provides the values of for each bars and each stacks. So I want to show the labels, yes, and for complete bar and bar segments. For the complete bar, as in, it will give you the total aggregated sum for each bar, and the bar segment is for each of the bars. So essentially, the complete bar doesn't make much sense here, because this is this sum for each year for the profit and sales, which is of no use to us, essentially, because both of these two are different measure. So we would not want to add them up. So I'll just have it removed. Now we have individual value for the sales and the red one for the profit. So now there's one more thing, is that since this is a stack bar, so we see that, based on the spaces, it displays the labels. So for the stack, which is the biggest one, and for the stack, which is the smallest for the profit, we don't see the labels. So essentially, in this case, I would prefer to have this, side by side bars. Okay, and now if I'll just select complete bar, so this will make much more sense, essentially. So blue is for the sales and red one for this profit. So till here, this is fine. We can see, okay, that how the profit and how the sales has grown over the different, over the period. But now, since the proportion between the sales and profit, there's a huge difference between them, essentially, I would say. And the scale on the axis, on the y-axis or the value axis, I would say, essentially it always reflects based on the higher values. So if you just try to see or compare the value over, the scales, it would be very difficult to understand, essentially. So what can be, why I'm telling you this essentially is that since right now we have only 4 years of data in this data, so we can see the level very clearly itself. Okay, so these are the sales values, but there may be situations where we have in historical data, and for around 20 years, 30 years of data, and in that case the bars, the width of the bar would become very, based on the number of years we have, it would try to adjust itself on this on the plot here, and essentially it will become very thin, and in that case the labels would not be properly visible. So in that way, there are two different ways how we can look at the data and understand. Is one is to compare the height of the bars against the scales on the y-axis, or to have a tooltip, like we see, like when we hover our mouse here, so on any of the data point, it will just pop up information, a box with a few different informations, which can be changed, or means more information can be added to it or can be removed to it. So there's a two-way in such scenario. So I hope we are able to follow this so far. Yes. Okay. So this is good. Now let's say we'll change, or we'll tweak this story, just a minor change to this, and I'll say that not over the year, it should be over the different months. Okay, so we are looking at now what we want is that not just year wise, but you also want to distribute a data based on monthly, a month, and month and year. So what can be done essentially is it's very straight actually. So I would like to if I just go here and order date, if I'll see, so you see out of different columns that we have, for the date columns, which is of the data type of the columns, which is of date essentially, to automatically create hierarchy for it. Essentially, we have two different arrows, one arrows for each of the column. So it gives another dimensions to be added. So if it is a date column, so what exactly in date we want? So essentially, the first one is the order date. So essentially, it will be the exact date, the date, month, and year part. And then we have different functions available, and we have hierarchies also. So if we just select right now, year of order date is selected. So we want to have a look at, look into from the month perspective. So we can select month here. But what would happen here essentially? It will display the data from January to December, but we don't know for which year, right? All the years are aggregated, are just combined into the month. So this can be handy when someone wants to say that, okay, can we see compare monthly, as in for the complete data, that for which month the sales are going the higher. But again, what is the reason behind it? We can say that, okay, for November I can see the sales, I would say a drastic change or growth in the sales value, but we don't know essentially whether this increase is consistent for all the year, or there may be some year which have just performed outstanding. So consist. So a better way to look into this would be to add another dimension, and that would be year. So what we can do is that we can again click on here, and from order date, we won't be searching just month. We can just look into year and month. So what it does, that it will create the category axis in hierarchy. Here we go. So we have year, and then we have all the months over here. Now that is one thing that I was talking about earlier, that the labels, the labels can be helpful when the data point is a list. But right now we don't know which label is being displayed for which one. Can we make something out of this? The bigger bars, okay, fine, we can see here. So now my question to be to all of you, so what can be done? What can be done? We have different ways to fix this essentially. So are you all following so far actually? So essentially, this is the same, the same bar chart. We just added the hierarchy. So this is just when you know that what to change and from where, it's just seconds of activity to be done. So what we need to do is that we need to, for the year of order date, we just need to come here, click on this small arrow, and on the order date, if we select here, it will give an option here, and we just need to select this year of month. So automatically it will divide all the different bars in different months for the year. So now the question is how to make this more meaningful. So one option we can have is, first let's remove the labels from here. All right. Now one way is that, as I mentioned earlier, that we already have this tooltip. The other way that can be done is to make use of the zoom slider. So we can go to the properties, and we want to add a zoom slider to the category axis, because the number of in our categories are way too many. So I'll go to the category axis, and I'll add a zoom slider here. Okay. Now this gives us an option to just zoom in the data and see how it's behaving. But still, when I add a zoom slider, there's one thing that I see here is in the data is that even though I can make just try to understand that how the bars are behaving. Say that this one or even this one. We can look into the scale and I can understand. I don't know how much is the total value if I don't hover, but I know this is something very near to this specific point on the value axis. Same goes for all this. So this is something near to 1 million. Sorry, it's not 1 million or 1 lakh. So, but to identify the values on the profit, because the values are way too lesser than the sales, everything looks very close to zero. So what can be done is that a better way is to have another scale just for the profits. So for that, since we want another scale, okay, I don't want to compare the profit or say on the same scale we are looking at the sales. So let's have another scale. So again, that would be on the y-axis or the value axis. So I'll go to the properties and value axis. And what I'll do is instead of single scale, I'll click on dual scale. And on the right scale, I will add the profit. Okay. Now, if we see the data, we need to compare the blue one with the left scale and the red one with the right scale. So now we can understand essentially, at least we have some idea essentially, if not the exact what the bar is reflecting, but essentially how this would be between something 14,000 to 16,000. Same goes for this between 6,000 to 8,000. So something odd 7,000 it can be. So a way of representing in such scenario. So okay, so I hope we have all reached so far till here. Okay. Now the other way is that that is already configured. What we call as the tooltip. Essentially, what I said is that you place your mouse over the cursor, and it will automatically pop a small prompt, which is called as tooltip, to display some informations. So this can be configured again from the properties. You need to go to the properties and you'll find an option called as tooltip. So in the tooltip, by default for a bar chart, these three options are readily available: the category axis, the value axis, and the color by. What does this mean? So again, the category axis is where we have defined the category. If it is a vertical oriented chart, so this is the category axis. If it is the horizontal alignment, then this would be a category axis. In this case, this is category, this is value axis. So a category axis on a tooltip, what does this mean? This means is that when we hover our mouse over a specific data point, the first value that we see, order date of month, it will display whatever is mentioned on the category axis. The category axis is mentioned is order date of month. And what is the value for this order date of month for where we have placed our cursor? So it says it's November 2015. The next is the value axis checked. So what is the value axis? The value axis for the red one is that is sum of profit and the value for that. And then what is the column names? So column names, again, it depends on what we have defined on the color by. So in this case, it doesn't make much sense here. So we can decide to just remove it. A color by, a tooltip on the color by would make more sense when we are using just a single measure against a category instead of two different measures. So we will also look into that perspective. Now, what all we can do? So now let's say I'll just a small assignment for you. Essentially, I'll tell you I'll just make a small change to this, and I'll add as a user of the dashboard, I would like to see the sales. I don't want profit. Of the superstore, over there is a category called as ship mode for the latest year. So let's say what you can do out of this. So I'll give you 5 minutes for this, and it's like essentially I'll give you a hint. Essentially is that we don't need a dual scale. We just would want to get rid of some of profit. We don't need this at all. Superstore over ship mode, so we know what is the category and we know what is the value. So let's say but we need to remember one thing, that we need to look at the data only for the latest year essentially. So what is the latest year in this one? 2017. So can we try this and let me know once done? You can just let me know on the chat window once you're done. If you're not able to, I would just want you to try once to get the latest year. If not, also then we can just compress till the shape mode on the category axis, and we can continue from there. And you all know where to locate limit by expression, right? Properties, data, limit by expression. Okay, so are we done, or we need some extra time? So let me first convert this to the minimal requirement. So what I'll do is that I'll get rid of sum of profit here. Right click and I'll remove. Oh, we have this bar chart on based of sum of sales, but I still do see two axes, which is not needed. So I'll go to properties, value axis, and go to single axis scale. Perfect. Now, what else? We need to see the sales on the shape mode. I'll go to category axis again, and instead of order date, I'll select something called a shape mode. Perfect. Fine. Since we have very fewer categories on the ship mode. So in this case we can make use of the labels. Perfect. But the question comes when we say for the latest year. Right now this is displaying for all the data that we have for all 4 years of data. When we say latest year, what is the latest year of data that we have? With respect to order date, I see 2017. Minimum is 2014. So 4 years of data we have. So essentially, we would want to do something which would enable this bar chart just to display the 2017. So one way is that we right click on this, go to properties. In the properties on the left hand side, we see data, marking, we have limit by marking, we have limit data using expression. So we can make use of this. And this is something like what we want is that latest of order date. And essentially order date is a date column. It just doesn't have a year, right? But we are just looking at the year perspective. So in this case, what we can do is that on this limit of expression window, we have this function category. So when we click on this, drop down to see what are different categories of functions. So I'm looking something for date and time, and in here you see a different varieties of functions which are related to date and time. Why I have selected date and time? Because this is we are looking at the order date, and we just want to fetch this year value, right, for this. So let's just try to scroll down and see different. I want something, and what you can do is that when you select any of the function, automatically here at the bottom of it, you see the explanation for the function, and also it gives kind of an example what it means. So you see, so I'll go more down. I'll see year. It says returns the year from a date, and how it will need to write year of the column. So let's do that. We can directly insert the function from here, select and insert, or straight away we can just start typing, and automatically it provides an IntelliSense, essentially. So it provides a prompt. So if we have not done any typos, so it will automatically provide a different varieties of options to be selected from the list. So year, and year of what? So year of order date. I'll set from here. So fine. So year of order date should be. So one way is that when we know that we are looking at 2017, so we can directly hardcode 2017. Okay. So automatically this has the data has changed to display for the 2017 instead of all the all the time period that we have. But the question comes here is that say that other data keeps on changing, right? There may be a situation that so far we have data till 2017, but after some days or some weeks down the line, there may be more data to it or a date. So once we have 2018 or 2019, let's say 21, 22 different years of data being added to this, does the current settings or the limit by expression what we have done would make sense essentially? Because it has been asked for the latest year, right? So once the data changes, the word in itself latest year is would keep on changing, right, based on data. So in that case, hard coding a limit by expression to some values essentially in that case, say that we have another 1 year of data. So if we have written our limit by expression in this way, then every time the data changes, we would need to come back to here and change our year. So can we have something, it makes us think that can we have something, which would enable the dashboard to change by itself. We don't need to, necessarily come and update it every time here. So in such situation, the expression that we write should be very dynamic in nature. So how that would do? So essentially, we know we are looking at year of order date. So year of order date should be latest. So when we say latest, what does that mean? Latest. Can we say the highest? And when we say the highest, can we say the max value, the max year, when the year is the max of all the data? So how we can write in that way is that we have a function called as max. So max of what? So out of all the year. So what this does is that this will limit, this will just, filter in those year, which is those year of the order date, which is max of the year. So now any change to data, would automatically, the expression would automatically adjust based on that. We don't have to, update it every time. So we'll look more, deeper into the expression essentially, because we need essentially at least 3 hours just for the expressions. We have so many different, functions and, different aggregations and different ways of, because this is, as a data analyst, this is what we need to do is essentially we would need to have all the weapons available for us to compare the data. Essentially, it can be a straight aggregation, it can be a comparative, it can be in terms of percentage, it can be over over period of time, it can be over multiple hierarchies or different nodes. So we'll look into them once we cover all the different visual perspective. So I think we are good so far that if we have to limit our data based on scenario, something very similar to this, what we can do apart from limit by expressions, what else can be done for such things? If you can remember, or if you can just try to because we have already covered this in our previous season. There's one more option in all the visuals which works very similar to the limit by expression, but the only difference is that we don't have to write too many, most of the functions are already available there. So the option is called as hide/show on the properties. So if I go to data and I'll just have this remove, and essentially, my bad, it's essentially just the opposite, show or hide items. So if I come down to show or hide items, I'll click on add, and it's taking value access value. A value access value as in whatever we have, whatever calculations we have defined from the measure part essentially. But we don't want it, the calculations to be changed based on, the measure that we have defined. Essentially, we want them on a category, and the category is the order date. So what it does is that essentially it automatically takes aggregation for this one. So what we can do is, so when we just write max of order date, so it would not look into the year. It will just look into the max of the highest value. What we see is here 30th December 2017. So it will filter only for the highest value, but we just want to see from the year perspective. So what can be done is, okay, it will take an aggregation. Okay, so what can be done is something like this. So one means essentially it will just take the top one. That is the max one would be 2017. So this is again another way of what we say is either displaying the data or limiting the data. It does both. So I'll mention as show or hide items on the properties. Now, let's say I'll copy. We would want to, for the current situation, we also want, essentially this bars. Essentially, we want to add in one more category. So let's say to the existing story, I will say that apart from our ship mode, I also want this segment category to be included to this one. what can be done? One way I would say is you can have it added to the category axis. We can have multiple categories added to this, and let's just I will add segment. But again, it makes sense essentially what has been asked. But since in analytics, it is again we don't have a fixed solution for a same problem. We just look for the best option out of this. So what can be the better representation of this, so that it will be very clear and essentially, and it also relay the message that we are trying to convey. So what can be done is that we can make use of this color by, since essentially only one measure being used. So we have this option available for the color. When there is multiple measures, like what we did earlier, like sum of sales, and with sum of sales we have sum of profit. So in that case, the color by would display two different colors based on different measures. So it would be like as many measures we keep on adding, it can be more like discount or whatever different calculations we can add, and the different colors would keep on increasing based on that. But right now we have single measure. So we can do is that we can go to this color by and select segment. So what it does is that essentially automatically it creates three different bars for each of the shape mode, and all these three bars depends on the different categories and the number of unique values that we have in the segment column. So this is one way. The other way is that say that when there will be a situation where the number of segments or the available spaces on the for the bar chart are we don't have not enough. So in that case, we can make it, can just right click and we can make it stacked bars. So essentially all the segments would be would appear on the same bar in just different stacks. And at the top we have this overall values for its shipping mode. So this is one way. Now, what can be other way? Let's say we need to add one more dimension to this. We already have two dimensions, right? The ship mode and segment, but we want to add one more dimension. Say that instead of ship mode, I just want this to display the data in terms of what we did earlier, monthly. And as we know that we have made the settings, we have just to display the maximum of a year, that is 2017. So we can just directly display the month values, because it would be quite apparent, right, that this January is just for 2017, all this month. Now, how can we add another dimension, right? The ship mode to this, if we need it. So all the visuals that we have specifically, not the tabular visuals, but the visuals essentially, which can be called visuals essentially, the graphs, the bar chart, the line chart, the pie charts. There's one option called as trellis. So when we go to the properties, we see the option called as trellis. So what essentially it does is that it gives an option to divide our frame amongst different categories, and it can be a combination of rows, columns, and pages, or it can be in different panels. And I'll show you how all these things how it changes with the different selections. So let's say that we'll add our shape mode to the rows of this trellis by. So what happens is automatically for there are multiple rows created. Instead of just having a single bar chart, you'll see that there are multiple rows of bar charts created for each of the shipping mode. So essentially, this is very similar to having a 4 different bar charts over each other for each of these segments. So essentially it's a one way of what I would say that saves our time essentially. So we just change the trellis by and automatically it will do for us instead of we doing the same thing again 4 times. But what makes this better than the other option is that if we want to create 4 different bars for each of the different categories, we can do that. That's not a problem. But essentially, let's say again that what if tomorrow there's another category added to the ship mode. So in that case, what would happen? Again, we would need to, have an enhancement request from the user, and we would need to add one more bar chart for the fifth categories. But if we have set a trellis panel, essentially, so what it does that it changes based on the categories. You can have a category added to this, you can have a category removed to this, and this would automatically reflect.
Just a quick info, guys. Intellipaat provides Business Intelligence Master's Program in partnership with Microsoft, the course link of which is given in the description below. Now, let's continue with the session.
Without or any intervention after this. So this is one way. So similarly, how we can see we have different rows created for this one. So again, this is just for more like what is the how the space allowing us on the page, and what can be better for us essentially. So we can, instead of rows, we can select column, and those will be different bar charts in column ways it will be created. So let's look at them one by one. So again, I'll go to the trellis panel, and instead of the rows, I'll just click on and select the sheet mode. You see here, same thing, but over on different column wise. Same thing can be done at the page level. So in this case, what happens is that all the four bar charts would not be visible at once. Instead, it provides a way of paging. You see, first class, and we have the scroll automatically created. So when we scroll down, the next page, and the next page. So this is another way of the data. And then we have this panels. So when we click on panels, automatically all these whatever the values that we have defined on the rows and columns would become invalid. This is one way. So this is more like a combination of rows and column, I would say, essentially. So depending on the different kinds of categories we have, that many different frames would be created in here. So I hope we are good at with the properties of the bar charts. So let's look into others. So the next in line is the waterfall chart. Waterfall. Okay. So by waterfall, what comes to our picture essentially? To me, I would say that it's more like I wouldn't say hierarchy, but something more like an order from top to bottom. How waterfall, the water falls from the stream, in a waterfall. So essentially, this is very similar to a bar chart. Very similar to a bar chart. So let me first, I'll click on this and to add a new page, and right away I'll just change this to. So I will click on waterfall chart to bring in the waterfall. Fine. So this is a waterfall chart, and it looks in a way like a bar chart, but how does it differ? So essentially, a waterfall chart is like a bar chart. The difference is that a waterfall chart values are cumulative essentially, and that is the default settings of a waterfall chart. So what does mean by cumulative? So for that, let me add a bar chart just for a comparative value. So this is sum of cells, so I'll also add sum of cells here, and I'll add a label so that you would know perfect. And similarly, I'll add a label to this properties also. Let's compare them one by one. So we have the same categories on the category axis. The color by it doesn't make any sense as a moment, so we can just have ignore them for both of them. So two things: the calculation, the measure, sum of cells, and the category. Both of them are same. But when you look at the bar, can you try and find? Can you try and see what exactly is happening here on the bar, on the values on the bars of the waterfall chart when we compare it to the essentially with the bar chart? On a bar chart, we see the exact actual values for each ship mode. That for first class, this is the total sales made. For the same day, this is total sales made. But when we look at the waterfall chart, when we look at the first bar, the first class, that is fine. The value matches perfectly. But when we look at the same day or any other bars, what is exactly happening here? So how it differs from a bar chart is that what we call is you can call it as a cumulative sum or a running total. What does that mean? Is that that means is each bar is the sum of all previous bar. So since first class is the first bar, essentially we don't have anything before to this. So that's why the values are matching. But as we move towards right, the same day we have around 1,28,000 some odd numbers of sales. So what does a waterfall chart does is it will add this and this value, everything prior to this, the current bar. So this will be like 3,51,000 some values plus 1,000 some value. It will be something around 4 lakh and 70 or something around 80,000. So 4,79,000. So same goes for the third one. So third one, these three values would be added. These three values would be added. So this value plus this value, it will be 1973. Similarly, same for this, all the values would be added for this. And the last bar, we have this total bar. So this will always be equal to the sum of overall, overall sales value. How do we know that? There's one way to look at it as to find what is the overall sum of sales. So for that, let me use a KPI chart. A KPI, as we know that, essentially provides KPI, and just, we'll go through this in detail. Now you see the sum of sales in our data. If we add all the sum of sales, irrespective of any categories, so it will be something around what we can see at the final total bar. And since all these bars are cumulative, the final bar will always have the total values that we have for overall. This is how a waterfall chart differs from a bar chart, just that it is a running total or a cumulative sum. Either way, both of these means the same. So let's look into the properties of this one quickly. So essentially, since most of the properties, from now onwards, would be very similar. So it will be very, we can just move very quickly from here. So I'll just right click on here and go to properties. So it's very similar to a bar chart. It's just that one or the other two things are a bit different. Like we have this total bars in a waterfall chart, which we don't have, on the bar chart. So this is more like that to see whether we need to include a total bar or not. So at any point of time, we can just get rid of it. And if you want to include, like in that case, what it should be displaying, and essentially how it will be colored, the bars on this one. Apart from that, the appearance, you see vertical or and horizontal. Then how we want to show the waterfall, what would the size of the bar, as in the width, the level of transparency. And you see this, there's very thin lines connecting the bars. So do we need to have them or not? And again, do we need to use a separate color for marking or not? So formatting again depends on the sum of sales for each of them. What different formats we can just provide. Category axis, what can be defined on the categories. Again, value axis depends on the measures and the formulas or the aggregation. It can be very straight aggregation, like sum of sales, max, mean, and it can be a complex calculations, colors. So essentially the color, like how the colors on this would change. So automatically it would create a rule, but at any point of time we can override this and we can add our own set of rules for this. So this is very, similar, all things very similar to a bar chart. Just, the way it represents the data, that's the only thing, but very similar. Labels again, if you want to display the labels or not. If you want to display, like for which we have to display, do we need to display for all of them, or only when something is marked, or not at all? And how the label would be oriented, like horizontal or vertical. So by default, setting is horizontal. You can have the vertical element as well. Again, tooltip. So tooltip is for category access, the value axis, and the color by. Essentially, you can at any point of time you can add your own set of informations to be displayed on the tooltip. Legend again. These are the legends. So what extra additional information that we would want to define, so that we can do here, and what not, we can just have them remove. Even within the legend, there are two additional settings essentially to say that we have this color. So we can just select color by, and we can just get rid of title and access selector. So essentially, this will just display the color codes or the color categories. With selector, it gives a way, to change or to select any other different categories that's been defined. If you don't want, you can just have it removed. Fill is very similar what we just saw in the previous tab. We have these lines and curves. So essentially, the lines and curves subsets show right items. It is same for all of them. So I'll just keep these for the rest of the visual. But lines and curves. So let's look at the lines and curves. What does they mean essentially? So I will explain that on behalf of a bar chart. So at any point of time, essentially, we would need to give a reference, a kind of a benchmarking to understand how our data or how it is, performing. So you see, by default, we have this horizontal line created for average y. It says horizontal, as in the line will be horizontal, and it will be average of y. What is the average of y? So this is the y-axis. So it would be average of this. So average of whatever data we have. So it will find the average of overall data, and based on that, it will draw a line here. So for each of the lines that we have defined here, we can add more. So for each of them, we have a separate set of settings here. So essentially, what are they? So I'll add the name of the line, what exactly it is representing, and also the values. So this help us to understand, okay, this line is the average of the value, and the average value is this much. So essentially, what I can make out of this is that for the second class and for the standard class, their values are above the average value. So the cells are more in these two cases. And so these are the two mode where I see the values below average, and it makes me think that something's not going right with this, and something needed to be done for these two shipping mode. So let's go into the lesson curves again and see another ways to we can do a lot of different things essentially. We can a horizontal line, it can be straight line, or it can be based on certain column from the data table, or it can be between average and standard deviation. It can be a curved line. So essentially, there are so many different components from the statistics that has been provided. Yes, but more or less, when we're looking at the descriptive analytics, essentially, so most of the time the straight line is are used, and when we select it, these are different things that can be essentially used to define the horizontal line. So we can have a fixed value, maybe based on our business. We know what can be a benchmarking, a straight value, and based on that, we can just hard code any values here, or we choose to use an average of the values, average, or any other, it can be standard deviation, it can be max, it can be mean, anything, or it can be any custom expression. It's not a straight calculation, but a more complex expression. So we would see this about the custom expression, when we deal with the complex functions and expressions that we have here. Also, we can just choose to how the line would appear and what would the thickness of it, depending on. All right. So I think it would take another an hour essentially to cover all the respective visual, and then we can start with the transformations. So let's move to the next one in line, and that is the line chart. So essentially, we have what we have seen in the bar chart or the waterfall chart. So essentially, it represents data, cumulative or aggregated data, essentially against different categories. So we can compare each of the values within a category, like how they have been performing. But there can be situation essentially where we would need to see the trend, essentially how the trend is being behaving, it's going on essentially. And when we say a trend, essentially, so usually that is with respect to the time, essentially. I don't know if all of us we follow cricket match or not, but essentially it's if we see essentially between the match, it's they display different variety of things, information, and one among them is the trends, like how the scores of both the team they are being behaving, essentially with respect to each other over the period of different overs. So same thing when it comes to represent the trend, to see the trend of how the data is behaving. So the line chart comes in picture. So let me click on the line chart, essentially. So you see, when you click on, automatically it takes essentially, as I said, that trend against time. Okay, but we can have other categorical values, which are not date or time values. But essentially, yes, the better way to look at this is against a time period. So this how we can see see that how over the period of different months on in different years, how our sales has grown or decreased for each time period. So this is just for one variable, that is sales, and we see that okay, how it has behaving, going up and down. But when we say trend, it is more again it's more like a comparative comparative statements. So essentially those are more like we need to compare one value against another value. So again, when we say comparative, the comparison can be between two different calculations, two different values, or the comparison can be against different categories. So what they mean, essentially, so we'll have a look at it. So let's say that we would want to see the how the trends going on for the sum of sales for different for a specific categories. Let's say again the ship mode. So we have this line by option, essentially. So how we want to divide our line. So as of now, I see that there's nothing been defined on line and color. So automatically it will, it will create only a single line for the sum of sales for the time period. But say that I want to split the line among a category called a segment. So you see, three different lines have been, created. And essentially, when we say that the segment is consumer, you see, so essentially for the three lines also we can have all the three different lines in among different colors. So we can select the same segment in the color by. So now we have three lines, and all three lines are are distinct, essentially, because the color have changed. So we can understand that, see how they are behaving, essentially, and they are more kind of very uniform, essentially, all the three lines, irrespective, just at one data point, essentially, when we see that it's at October 2016, and between October and December 2016, that there was sudden spike on the sales for the consumer segment, essentially, and again it went down to the same level. So this is one way of representation. The other way can be to make it more, essentially, I would say, clear, or what other things can be done. Let's look into those. So I'll right click on this and I'll go to properties. All right. Now again, data is the same. The marking, remember marking and expressions. I'll go to the appearance. So we have some separate settings in the appearance. So we can change the line width, the transparency. Now this is very important with respect to a line chart, to display the marker. We see. So on every curve, that is on every data point, it will add a marker. So that will be, help us to see, what are the different data points essentially. Now, again, the marker size we can just adjust with respect to the number of data points that we have and the width of the line that we define. Then we can just draw them in step one line essentially. So it will be more like in a rectangular format essentially, other than the steep edges. Then if there are any empty values in between, say that in between there are for any month we don't have data, it's blank essentially. So in that case, if it's set break lines, so in that case there will be a the line would be broken, and that would unnecessarily display that okay, this is where we don't have a data. Use separate color for marked items, and again compensate for missing values. So this is one thing. The rest of the thing essentially are very same, so I'm not going into more deep into that. We can, on the x-axis we can define the categories. On the y-axis we can define one or more calculations. And line by is that this would like this is a way where like we can split our lines into a single or multiple, more than single line. So it depends on the category mentioned here and what are the different unique values in this category. Color by is that based on the category selected here, all the lines that we have here will be colored based on that. Then labels again. So this is also very important for line chart. We can provide this information essentially what each line respect to. So we can have this line identifier. You see, automatically it will have a label for each of the line. What does they corresponds to, and also for each individual value we can have labels for them essentially. Now again, when we want to display the labels, do we need to display are we displaying the labels at all the time? So all would be good. In there may be situations where we want to say that no, we don't want, essentially there are too many data points and I don't want them to be displaying all the times. I just need to display them when I select something. So in this case we can just select this option for marked rows. Let's look into the properties again. So that is about the levels. Then the tooltip, again, it's very similar. We can add more options to the tooltip from here. The legend again, we can have this on the left hand side or the right hand side, or we can just hide them if you don't want them, and what all can be selected based on the checkboxes here. Trellis, very similar to the bar chart that we discussed earlier. We can add one more, one or more categories to this dimension to this, and based on that, the line chart would automatically, split itself, and that many number of different charts should be created for each category of the columns selected here. Lines and curves, error bars, subsets, sorted items, these are all same. So essentially, these are more like kind of things which depends on practices actually. So once you start working on these things, automatically you'll try to memorize things essentially, what and exactly what and where they are located. Now within the same line chart, okay, essentially. So now what we are looking at is we are looking at the trend against the time period for a category called as segment. But essentially there can be situations where we would need to compare two values against each other instead of different categories. So let's say that we would need to see the trend essentially. The use case would be to compare essentially the profit against the sales. So what does that mean is when the sales increases or when the sales decreases, I would want to know how my profit changes with that essentially. A general sense, I would say a common sense to me would say that obviously when the sales increase, the profit should increase, but better to get it confirmed. So in that cases, I will have another calculation created for that. And you see that as I added this sum of profit along with sum of sales, automatically a trellis panel has been added. Okay, and you see trellis by column names. So what essentially what does this column names mean? This column names corresponds to whatever is mentioned on the y-axis. It changes with that. So what I want is that I want to compare sales against profit. So essentially, I would not want in a trellis panel. So as I remove the trellis panel, it just threw error to me because it doesn't know all the axes, all the categories are already filled in. So it doesn't know where to fill this additional information, that is sum of profit. So in that case, we would need to remove a specific from here. So essentially, line by was against the category per segment, but right now I'm not looking at any specific category other than the time period. So the color by also I'll select as the column names. So right now, essentially, these are defined by whatever mentioned on the y-axis. So now we can see the difference, essentially how things are. There is one specific data point of interest over this data is that again during this 2016 October to December, there was a sudden spike in the sum of sales data. But when I look at the trend for the profit, essentially I see a downward direction in that, even though the sales was I would say that it was way too high, essentially, when we compare it to the other time period. Okay, so this is something which would make us think and look into our data, what essentially is going here. Okay, so this is how a line chart can be used, essentially, for to see the trends. Okay, so we'll move to the next one, and the next one in line is the combination chart. Yes, a combination chart, in some cases it is also called as the Pareto chart. So essentially, by the name itself, you can understand, right? A combination. A combination as in a combination of what? So far we have covered bar chart, waterfall, and line chart. So again, we can treat a waterfall chart again very similar to a bar chart. So a combination chart is a combination of a bar chart and a line chart. Essentially. So within the same chart, we can have for different values we can plot multiple. We can plot a bar chart along with a line chart, or we can plot multiple bars for same, or we can plot multiple lines for the same. So we'll see, and let's see and look into more detail aspect of that. So what I'll do is that I'll just bring in the combination chart here. So at the first glance, I would say that to me it looks exactly the same as the bar chart. I was saying that essentially at the first glance, it appears to me exactly the same as the bar chart. On the category axis or the x-axis, we have this shipping mode. On the y-axis, we have sum of sales, and the corresponding bars for each of them, for each of the data point. Now, how does it changes? It is different from a line chart or a bar chart. Is that we have this essentially bars for sum of sales. So essentially, let me add one label for each of them. Now, along with this, I can add another category. It can be anything. So again, this is very similar, and exactly this can be achieved even in a bar chart. The only difference is that there is one specific option called as series by. You see, series by. So when you go to the properties, we find a setting called series by. So what does it do? As soon as we add more values to the y-axis, those are the series by, the column names are added in the series by. So the column names is a kind of function which corresponds to the values selected on the y-axis automatically. If there are 3 calculations, so automatically the column names will have 3 values: sales, quantity, and one more. Along with this, what's been defined in the series by, it gives us option here to change the kind of chart here. So it's more like we can have a bar chart for sum of sales, and we can have a line chart for the profit or the quantity. And also we can just change the color based on that. So if you look at the appearance, it has the appearance of a combined appearance of a bar chart and a line chart. Like we can have a side-by-side bar, a stacked bar. Also, we have to display the markers similar to what we have in line chart. So it will display a marker. If you go to labels, again, we have these two options, which is very common to a bar chart. Then we have this one from the line chart to show the markers on the labels. So this is one where it can work in a combined way of a line chart and a bar chart, or else we can make use of it in a similar like a line chart by defining both the two calculation as lines itself. But again, when we do that, the only questions that will be, then why are we using a combination chart? So why aren't we doing that in line chart? So yes.
Just a quick info, guys. Intellipaat provides Business Intelligence Master's Program in partnership with Microsoft, the course link of which is given in the description below. Now, let's continue with the session.
That would be a right question. So if at all we need to display them or display different lines, then better to use a line chart, essentially. If it's a mixed between a bar chart and a line chart, so in that case, we can make use of this, a combination chart. All right. Let's look into the properties again to see what we will have. So again, all the different properties that we have, appearance will have a combination of, from the line chart and a bar chart, and rest everything would be same, apart from there's an additional option called as series. You just change the type of the chart or the colors. So if you look at the other chart in Spotify, we'll find almost all of them have a setting called as color by or color. We don't have color. Instead, we have the series, and this enables this provides us a way to add a series and also the color. Then labels, tooltip, legend, actually everything are. So this is a combination chart. Okay, so let's look into others. Pie chart. Okay, so what in what case a pie chart can be used? Essentially, a pie chart essentially is a good way when we want to see the values, the proportion of the values it holds against its own category, essentially. Say that for the different categories, so far we have seen that a value against the categories, we see that how they have, the trend has changed or how they have grown or decreased. But if you want to see, a proportion held by a certain category against all the values, in such cases, a pie chart would be used. So let me click on it, and by default, it selects, for the sum of sales against the shipping mode. So essentially, what does this mean? So the complete this complete circle essentially would be of 100%. So when you see the color on the legend on the right hand side, we get to know actually what each sector or what each color represents essentially. So without taking more than a second actually, or a fraction of seconds, I can easily understand that this is the bigger sector and this is the second class. So the second class has the highest sum of sales so far, and similarly same day has the lowest value so far. But that is fine essentially, even that information we can get from a bar chart also. But what difference this makes is this also give us an information, essentially what the value it holds against what is the total percentage it holds against total values. If we combine all the different values, all the different categories, and the sum of sales, so the standard class has 44.3% of the total sum of sales. Now, apart from that, we can add more information to this, and how. So let's look into that. I'll right click on to the properties and just let me drag it towards the top left. Let's appearance. So appearance essentially is that it's about the sorting of the sectors, the size. So essentially it would be in the order, like from bigger to small sectors, like this. So this would be an order. First the bigger one, second, then third, and this is the smallest one right here. And it's always in the clockwise way. The fonts, colors, we have already seen. The colors, this is how different sectors would be created. The number of sectors to be created in this pie chart would depend on the column selected in the color by. Okay, it depends on the number of unique values that we are using in the column. So as of now, the shift mode has 4 unique values essentially, so 4 sectors for each. Now, how the sector size would be size, which one would be bigger, which one would be smaller, would be based on the size. So this is the sector size defined. Now, there may be situations here so that you would want to the complete circle, what we see the pie chart, right? You can just how big it will be or how small you want to define. You can just have it fixed from here. But there may be situations where you want this to change depending on some specific values. It can be anything. The higher the values of this one, the higher the chart. Okay, and this would make more sense essentially when we are using the trellis panel essentially. I'll show you that. So before that, I'll go to the labels and what all we need to display in the label. By default, it's displaying the sector percentage. You see the percentage and the label are inside the pie. So we can add more information like sector value, sector category. Do we need this information? Category, you can we can already have this information from the color by, right? But if at all we don't want to display the legend, in that case we would need to display this information to make the user understand what this category corresponds to. So in that case, we would need to have the sector category. Again, the labels, do we need to display all the time? Yes, or only for this only when it is marked. So you see that each of the sector displays their own set of value, but when I select the smallest one, this is not displaying anything, and this is like it depends on the space to display the labels. Essentially, it looks for some minimum amount of space, and what is that minimum space? It's not defined by Spotify essentially. So this is something probably they will need to work more essentially to find a way, because there are so many times the user they come back to us and say that okay, we are not able to see this value, and since speaking we can't do anything about that essentially. So it's a kind of a tool limitation. So in such cases, the only help to us would be, to add a tooltip and they'll say that, okay, don't rely on the label. Instead, you can just hover your mouse over and just get those information like what it corresponds to. Okay, tooltip again, we can add the ratio is the percentage, sector size is the values, and color is the category. Legend, in that trust. So as I said earlier that the size, the pie size, how it matters, essentially when we have a single pie chart. So essentially, it doesn't matter at all. Essentially, you can just have it, the size, you can just divide, depend on, you can take a static value of it. But when we go to trellis, let's say I'll take a panel and I would want to, based on segment wise, now you see how the pie chart has the size of them are changing essentially, because this depends on the sum of quantity values essentially, and each segment will have a different sets of quantity, right? So essentially I can understand easily that the consumer has the highest sum of quantities, so the size of the pie is bigger, and then we can look more into more detail, right? Like within this segment, how each ship mode and how are the different values they correspond to. Okay, then I'll move to the next one, and the next one in line is the scatter plot. Again, a very important plot, I would say essentially, and it's one of the plot which is a very distinct essentially from the all the rest of the different charts that we have, and how essentially, because still here so many times, still here so far we are just looking at the measure value essentially, against the dimensions, against a category essentially, how they are behaving, how they're growing, or it's been decreasing, how the trends been with time essentially, there may be a situation where we would want to compare two variables against each other essentially, and without having and when I say the comparing two variable against each other, it's like the exact value of the variables without having to aggregate them. So far, when we look at any of the above visual, apart from the tables, the bar chart, waterfall line, combination pie chart, the value axis of each of these type of visual only accepts aggregated column, right? Those needs to be measured with some values, and there should be an aggregation function, sum, mean, max, any kind of functions needed. But there may be a situation where we would want to just correlate the actual value and not the aggregated piece of data against some other quantifier. So in such cases, a scatter plot can be used. It can how two variables are correlates to each other, how they're distributed, how are the values are they randomly distributed, are there any kind of correlation between them. So such things can be looked into with the help of a scatter plot. So you see that as soon as I selected, it automatically takes two of the out of all the different measures. When I say measure, essentially that means these columns hold some I would say is that quantifier or some values instead of a name or a category. Okay, so this is like displaying that how discount, or essentially let's say how a profit and when we plot a profit against the sales, how essentially they are correlated and they behave. So we can just have a look at the distribution, and we can just try to understand actually what they are pointing to. So this will give us the picture that how it's how the profit is behaving against the sale, how when the sale is increasing, how the profit is going, when the sale is decreasing, how essentially the profit is going down, or essentially what they mean to. Most of the values, if I see that it's not zero essentially, but it's very close to the zero essentially of the sales. But if I say that, if I select profit and discount, so this will make more sense essentially, that as the profit is increasing, you see how with decreasing, with increasing discount, how the profit is decreasing over a period of time. This is where the discount is the least, and so the profit is highest essentially in these cases. So this kind of a distributions essentially. Now there are too many different settings within it, and let's look into that one by one. So starting from appearance again, it's about the transparency essentially, how that it will be transparent, or what is the level of transparency for this marker that we see here. Zittering. So essentially, zittering is something is why is this option here? Because essentially we are not looking at the aggregated value. So there may be situations you see here that one or more values or more data points can overlap each other. So in such cases, how would we look into those data? So essentially, we can just change the zittering, and automatically, based on the zittering value, automatically vertically and also horizontally, it will start to change its direction of the distribution. There may be a situation where we want, so we just say that the overlapping are more between vertically essentially. So zittering with respect to y doesn't make much sense, but you see, so this would enable us to see more data point than how it was default essentially, because there would be values which are just beneath other data point. So this is what a zittering does. Then the formatting, again, it's the very same essentially, but this time we can format both the x-axis and y-axis, since both of them are measured here. Then we have fonts, x-axis, again very similar. Okay, then y-axis, so we can have a single or we can have more than one measure selected here, but we don't need to. We can actually essentially you can define your aggregation also, but it would also accept any measure column without aggregation. Now, again, the scales depending on the number of values or the number of columns selected here. Colors. So again, the color of the different values or the different marker we see here depends on the column selected here. Size. So we can make the size of each of the marker static, like uniform across, or we can just have them mapped to any specific column values, and based on the value, the size would automatically increase or decrease. Again, shape. So we can choose how to display this marker. Essentially, by default, the circle is selected. So essentially, you can just change it to anything else that you wish to. Also, you can just want to set a column values here, so that for different column values it will have different kind of what I say, a marker. So in this case, let's segment. So essentially, automatically it will it has three different unique values. So three different shapes it has automatically acquired. So at any point of time, you can just change it how you want. So accordingly, your graph would respond. So this would make us understand essentially that what each color stands for, and within that color, what each of these shape stands for. Rotation is again essentially we can have it based on how this will be rotated, essentially in what direction. So it can be based on any of the columns selected. Essentially it would look for measure value. So whether clockwise or counterclockwise, automatically it would rotate on that way. Again, drawing order, essentially you can just select any of the columns or values, and based on that, the order of the values within or the marker, they would be changing its positions based on the column selected here. Labels, what to display, and essentially you can have a separate label, separate column linked to this. All the visuals so far that we have seen, the label was driven by the value on the y-axis. So we did not necessarily select a specific column on the labels, but this is something very different. Essentially, you can plot the graph based on two different values, but on the label you can have your own sets of, like you can define the order ID, and each order it will be mapped to each of the order for each of the marker. Like, okay, then we have the tooltip. So again, tooltip, the default settings for the tooltip text is the marker. This is each marker shape, color, size, how the rotation is set, what is the x value, what is the y value. Then like the all others, we have legend, trellis, line connection. Again, this is something again a different. A line connection means essentially each of the marker interrelated somehow, and if they are essentially, do we need to show the relation between them, and in what order essentially. So this would be depending on the value selected here. So essentially all the interrelated the marker based on the column selected here would there would be automatically connections between them created, and how the order of the connection display, right, like from where to where it should go first. It can be defined from using this order each line by option. Then again, marker. So the default marker by how these marker are plotted, it depends on the calculations provided here. So essentially, by default, it takes the row number. So a row number is nothing but it is a formula which automatically creates a kind of a serial number for each of the row that we have in our data. And essentially that says that in a way it means that for each of the line or for each of the rows, the marker is generated on that basis. Then we have lines and curves. It's very similar to what we have seen earlier. Error bars, subsets, show ahead items. All right.
Just a quick info, guys. Intellipaat provides Business Intelligence Master's Program in partnership with Microsoft, the course link of which is given in the description below.
Now that we have come to the end of the session, please subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon so that you never miss any update from Intellipaat. Also, if you have any queries, then put down in the comment section and we will be happy to answer those. Thank you for watching.